Welcome to Cosmic Wand, the free library of your favorite fictions, fanfictions and many more. Make sure to subscribe and be part of our family. Now let's begin. Mim watched as Jack sighed after another failed attempt to get someone to believe in him and then gazed upon the one person that did believe in Jack. Mim smiled as a plan began to form and then go. Jack's attention as he told Jack to head to Little Whinging, England. Jack looked up at the Mim in utter confusion but did ask. Mim just chuckled softly as he watched Jack leave for the town. He was unaware that he had set in motion a destiny that would change many things in the years to come for both Guardians and humans. Meanwhile, a small girl ran from her cousin and his gang as she headed deeper into the woods. She smiled softly as her magic led her to a pond that had always eased her spirit with how peaceful it is. She then noticed the snow falling and grinned as she said, "Jack's early this year." Era laughed as she raced to her pond to find it completely frozen with a figure standing on the ice. He was dressed in a blue hoodie with frost covering it and brown pants while holding a staff. His short pure white hair fluttered in the wind as he turned and realized he wasn't alone, causing his icy blue eyes to widen in shock. Era smiled then waved shyly as she said, "Thank you for the early winter, Jack." The look on Jack's face was priceless to the Mim as Jack realized he was being seen for the first time in 289 years. Era giggled and stepped onto the ice without a second thought as she walked towards Jack. She stopped in front of him and smiled as he asked what seemed like a strange question to her, "You can see me?" Era looked confused and nodded as she said, "Why shouldn't I be able to?" Jack landed on his knees as Era realized something was wrong and asked, Did I do something wrong?" Jack just looked at her and said, "No one has been able to see me for 289 years. Era looked shocked then ran over to him as she hugged his legs. Jack looked at the little 5-year-old and smiled as he knelt and returned the hug as she giggled happily. She then noticed how it was getting and told Jack that she had to get back to her relatives before they locked her out again for the night, stiffened at that and asked why they would do that, causing the young girl to be sad as she said, "They don't like me very much." Jack then saw the loneliness in her eyes and smiled as he said, "I'll stay here in case they do lock you out so you have someone to talk to about it." The beaming smile he got filled his heart with warmth as she nodded then turned and ran the way she came while waving goodbye. 2 hours later, Era came back with a black eye, causing Jack to ask what happened. Era told him that her uncle decided to throw her out of the house after she made a tiny mistake while cooking dinner. He was furious to hear that the man had punched her and told her not to come back for 3 days. Jack hugged Era then created a snug igloo for her to sleep. Era squealed happily as Jack led her inside and quickly cleared the ground of snow to create a door for her to keep in the warmth. He sat down to rest for a minute only to have Era crawl into and curl up in his lap. Jack went to say something but found her already asleep, causing him to smile. He then leaned against the wall and dozed off with Era safely snuggled into his arms. Over the 2 months until Christmas, Era and Jack became so close that nothing could shake her faith in the Guardians, Mim and Pitch, but her faith was the strongest in Jack. Era smiled as Christmas Day rang bright and true because Jack said he had a surprise for her. The order to make breakfast soon came, and after she was done, Era asked to go outside for the day instead of her cupboard. Her aunt thought about it and nodded as Era quickly got ready before her aunt could change her mind. She was soon out the door and racing towards her pond in bare feet. She entered the woods happily and hurried to the pond where Jack was waiting. She entered the area and called for Jack, who snuck up behind her and whispered, "Boo." Era jumped and then started laughing as she hugged him happily and asked, "What's the surprise you have for me, Jack?" Jack smirked and led her to a clearing where a huge Christmas tree had been decorated in icicles and frost by Jack. Era looked at the tree in wide-eyed wonder, then at Jack as he got a beaming smile. Era hugged the spirit who she could honestly say was her best and only friend she had at the moment. He then returned the hug as he whispered, "Merry Christmas, Era." 4 years later, Era hurried into the woods as the first snowfall of the season began to happen. The small 9-year-old grinned as she hurried towards her pond, unaware that Jack wasn't there yet but something or someone else was. She came out of the woods to find her pond had not frozen over yet, so she decided to explore the woods a bit when she suddenly heard the neighs of a horse. She looked around in surprise but couldn't see one yet despite how close it sounded. She turned and was met with the form of a tall, Black-haired man with gray skin. They both looked at each other in surprise when she noticed the horse beside him with the glowing eyes. She blinked and smiled as she bowed slightly and said, "Good evening." Pitch stared at the child he thought looked very familiar and blinked in amusement as she held a hand out to his nightmare with what looked like a sugar cube. The nightmare blinked. Dean stepped forward to sniff at the supposed treat, then licked the young child's palm to get the treat. Era smiled brightly, then hugged the horse gently, much to Pitch and the nightmare's surprise. Pitch couldn't stop a smile from showing as his nightmare seemed enamored with the child. She giggled and said, "For something that's supposed to be so scary, you're really gentle." Pitch coughed in amusement as he then asked, "What are you doing out here in the dark, child? Won't your family be worried?" Era's eyes became sad as she shook her head no and said softly, "My relatives hate me, to them. I'm nothing but a waste of space and a freak of nature." Pitch's eyes grew angry at that and he kindly asked for her family members' names. Era then gave their names and he ruffled the child's hair as she beamed up at him. Pitch told her to find somewhere warm for the night and that he hoped that he would see her again sometime in the future. 2 days later, Jack smirked as Era's hometown was underneath him and he dove down to the pond, which froze instantly as he touched down. He then looked up at the sky as it started to snow again, but far more heavily than the last few days. He didn't wait long as Era came running into the clearing, but something was wrong. She looked scared and hadn't noticed him yet. He then realized what the problem was as her uncle, aunt and cousin came after her with a vengeance. Jack grew cold with fury as he quickly made a blizzard that was near whiteout conditions surround the Dursleys. The 3 barnyard animals began to shiver and were starting to freeze to death when Jack stopped the blizzard because of Era finding a safe place to hide. The 2 watched as the Dursleys were carted away in an ambulance and Jack said, "You're not going back to those people. I'll take you to the Wizarding Bank and see if they have a solution to this mess." Era then found herself in Jack's arms as he called on the wind and leapt into the air. They then quickly flew towards London, unaware they were messing up a certain old man's plot to crush Era's spirit. Pairing. Jack Frost and Femme. Harry. Timeline. Starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Femme. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Femme. Harry. Amalthea. Femme. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter, or any songs that appear. All she owns is her Oversio. N of this crossover and her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. Ch.2. Era smiled in joy as they flew over London and quickly landed in an alley just off of Diagon Alley. She quickly followed him into the bank where they asked to see the Potter account manager, and the goblin looked at them in surprise at the polite tone they used. He then asked them to follow him and he would help them out. He led the 2 of them to a very fancy office where a goblin was sitting who asked them to sit down. Era and Jack both sat down as he asked why they were there, and Era told the goblin everything that had happened since she was placed at the Dursleys and what they had tried to do to her just a few hours ago. The goblin listened in horror, then told her that he had an idea that should work if they played their cards right. It would emancipate her and she would be free of the Dursleys and of Dumbledore's manipulations. Era and Jack looked at each other and nodded as Era quickly did the paperwork that she needed to sign, and they watched as it disappeared with a small crack of noise. Era sighed in relief as the emancipation went through and smiled at Jack, who returned her smile. They were then taken to her trust vault where she grabbed some money to grab some stuff she needed. The goblin then mentioned that he could get her a card that only she could use and touch, causing her to thank him. The goblin looked surprised, then nodded as they headed back towards the surface. Meanwhile, Dumbledore had just realized his instruments that were locked onto Harry Potter were no longer working and opened the drawer to find the duplicate bank key and the original were missing from the drawer. He growled as he realized what that meant and her IED off the grounds to apparate to the bank. He was about to go in when his target walked out with a relieved look on her face. He smirked, thinking this would be easy as he fired a spell that would literally freeze her in place. He started to walk towards his pawn when something seemed to block his spell, and suddenly a large Arctic wolf appeared from midair. Jack had stepped in front of Era to ask her something when he felt an ice spell hit him and fill his body with foul, foreign magic. He yelped as he found himself on all fours and then noticed the man the goblins had warned them about trying to get towards them. He started to growl, causing Era to look where he was looking, and she tapped him on the shoulder as she motioned towards the alleyway. They nodded together and hurried into the alley. Jack then focused and regained his human form as he grabbed Era and held her close. He leapt into the air seconds before Dumbledore found them and took off at high speeds. Era asked where we're going, and Jack softly said, "Somewhere that's safe from that old coot." Era then yawned as she snuggled closer to Jack, who held her tight. Era then drifted to sleep in Jack's arms as he smiled and kissed her forehead. Jack smiled as he landed in front of the mansion that rightfully belonged to Era and gently woke her up as he whispered, "Era, we at the mansion." Era slowly stirred as Jack held her gently and then opened her eyes. She yawned and then Jack helped her stand up as they realized the door was now open despite none of them had touched it. They entered the house together. Hannah Stunner came out of nowhere and knocked Era out. Jack was helpless to help her as Dumbledore caught her before Jack and said, "It seems I'll have to make sure you don't leave the Dursleys until I'm ready to do away with you." Jack swore softly as Dumbledore used an ancient magic to stop Era from leaving the Dursleys on her own power until she turned 15. He then followed them back to the Dursleys, where Era was shoved back into the cupboard. Jack watched sadly over the next few days as Era was kept inside to cook and clean the house, then locked back in the cupboard. She was allowed out after 5 days and headed for her pond, where Jack met her and held her as she cried her eyes out at being back at the Dursleys. As usual, Jack stayed as long as he dared but soon had to leave to bring winter to other parts of the world, leaving Era to the mercy of the Dursleys. But this year was a little different as Jack and Era had given each other a magical tattoo on each other's back. Roz was Jack's wolf form in a small snowstorm, while Jack's was Angel with wings made of ice. Jack and Era managed to form a mental bond with each other after giving each other the tattoos, giving Era someone to talk to during the lonely months without Jack. 2 more years passed as Jack and Era's bond grew deeper and deeper to the point they could finish each other's sentences. Jack had that the spell that hit him that day in Diagon Alley had unlocked 2 animal forms that he could be seen in by normal humans, but his second form was a little too showy, so he mostly kept to his wolf form when he was in the mood to be seen as a big, friendly dog. They had found Era also had 2 forms but couldn't practice due to being at the Dursleys. What amused Jack about them was that they redirect opposites of his animal forms, yet all the animals they could change into lived in snowy climates. July soon came, and with it, the letters from Hogwarts. Era was in shock as her relatives her and Dudley up then drove to a little sea shack out on a tiny island. When night came, Era settled down on the floor and began to talk to Jack. "Jack, you there? I'm always here for you. What's up?" "I'm just a little scared about Uncle Vernon. He seems a little unhinged." "Yeah, well, frankly they're all a little unhinged. Giggle *, that's true, but I think he's a little more unhinged than usual. You are more than likely right. They really don't want you to go to Hogwarts." "I don't even know if I want to go to Hogwarts, but I do need training in controlling my magic better." Era heard Jack sigh as he then said, "I know you do, but it worries me that you'll be near the old man who trapped you back at the Dursleys." "I'll be fine, Jack, as long as I have you." Just then a loud pounding was at the door, causing her uncle to run in with a shotgun and pointed it at the door as he yelled for whoever it was to leave. Suddenly the door was knocked down and the largest man Era and Jack had ever seen came through the doorway. She then froze as she realized her uncle had a crazed look on his face as he pointed the gun towards her. He then told the large man to leave before he killed her. Jack was ready to come to her side as fast as he could when the large man quickly bent the gun backwards to face Vernon and told the idiotic man to go sit in the corner with his family. Vernon sputtered as he did as told. The man then turned and said, "Hello, Era, it's been a while since I've seen you. Last time I saw you was when you were just a baby." He then wished her a happy birthday, causing her to smile shyly and thank him. He then told her his name and explained that he was sent to take her to get her school supplies. Era smiled up at the man as he then reached into his many pockets and brought out a slightly squashed birthday cake. Era thanked him as he gave it to her when her uncle then got brave and yelled, "She is not going to some crackpot school. That has some crackpot old man in charge. Hagrid looked at Vernon and growled, Dumbledore is not a crackpot. He is the greatest wizard to ever live, so don't go insulting him. This caused a huge row. That wound up with Dudley having a pig's tail when he tried eating Aira's cake. After that, the Dursleys all wound up running into the back room, leaving the two magic users alone to their own devices. Hagrid smiled gently and told Aira that she better get some sleep before they left in the morning. She nodded and curled up in a nice cool corner. To Hagrid's surprise, she quickly drifted to sleep. Jack whispered good night to her and also settled down to sleep. September 1st. Aira smiled as she followed Jack's instructions to the barrier and then slyly went through when no one was looking. Snowy Owl, she had called Hedwig, hooted happily as she was let out, and Aira told her that she could fly to Hogwarts. Aira then boarded the train and found an empty compartment to read in. She grabbed her books on ice magic, as she found out by bonding with Jack had made her ice mage. She began to read when a blonde boy who looked familiar came in and said, "May me and my two friends sit with you?" Aira looked up and blinked, then smiled as she nodded happily. The boy then introduced himself as Draco Malfoy, as his two friends then came in and he also introduced them. Aira then introduced hers. Causing Draco's eyes to widen slightly, but he didn't make any comments about her being famous, to her relief. Draco then remembered where they had seen each other at the same time as Aira and said, "The robe shop." Draco and she began to laugh as she then closed her book and started to ask questions about the wizarding world after she told them that her relatives had kept her from learning about her inheritance. Draco was more than happy to answer her questions when a red-headed boy then came in and said, "Can I sit here? All the compartments are full." Draco eyed the redhead and said, "That's impossible. New compartments are added when the cars get too full or someone wants to be alone." The redhead sneered at him and said, "At least, my father wasn't a stupid Death Eater. Besides, she probably wants to hang out with a light family rather than a dark family." The next thing the redhead knew, his underwear was frozen solid and filled with snow. Aira told him to leave before she really got mad, and the kid looked at her in shock, then hurried out of the compartment. About 3 minutes later, a pair of twins came in and asked to sit down so they could get away from their bratty younger brother. Aira looked at them and smiled as she nodded and introduced herself. The twins then grinned and then did something that had Draco laughing his butt off. "Aira-chan, my dear, absolutely spiffing to meet you. Old girl," Fred began in an old English accent, shaking her hands enthusiastically only to be shoved aside by his twin. "Simply marvelous," George said. "You have no idea how boring it has been at Hogwarts," he said, sighing dramatically. Aira and Jack were trying not to laugh at this display. Things were only going to get even more interesting from now on. "Aren't you two the Terror Twins Uncle Severus told me about?" Draco said in amusement. The twins tried quite unsuccessfully to look innocent. "Not happening." Aira laughed as she said, "Terror Twins." Fred and George grinned and Dee said, "We may have played a few pranks during our first year that got us that name." Aira couldn't contain her giggles at the twins' speech and Jack's comment that he said wasn't helping. "Well, a pair after my own heart." Aira smiled when a timid sandy blonde boy came in and asked, "Have you seen a toad anywhere? My pet Trevor ran off on me." Draco then said, "Why not ask a perfect to use a summoning charm?" The timid-looking boy blushed as he hadn't thought about that and thanked them as he left the compartment. Draco, the twins and Aira then started chatting about the classes at Hogwarts. Suddenly they heard crying and a young girl with slightly bushy hair came in sniffling as she asked to sit with them. Aira and Draco nodded as the twins asked what was wrong. She told them that a boy Dee called her a buck-toothed know-it-all and that he had red hair. The twins growled as they recognized the kid's description and excused themselves. The twins then came back 5 minutes later with Evie. Elle grins and told the young girl that their annoying younger brother wouldn't bother her again. Just then, an announcement came over the intercom and told them that they were about 2 hours away from Hogwarts, so they needed to get into uniform. The girls left for the washroom to change and then came back to sit with the friends they had made in each other. Aira was soon nervous as they got closer and closer to the castle. The train soon stopped at the station and they heard Hagrid's voice calling for the first years as they disembarked. The castle was amazing as Jack looked through Aira's eyes. And he smiled at feeling her joy and excitement. She then watched as they headed up the stairs where they were met by a stern woman with her graying hair in a bun. The woman told them to follow her. They headed into the castle where Era's education and life would truly start. Era sighed as her name was called to be sorted and walked up to the stool where the old hat was placed on her head. Era then heard someone in her head say, "Fuck, it's cold in here." Era then tentatively asked, "Who are you?" "I'm the sorting hat. Now let's see which house you belong to the most, my dear." The hat laughed as he saw her memories and said, "You'll certainly go far, young lady, but I believe the best person to help you is your head of house and to keep Dumbledore away as the head of Slytherin." It became so quiet you could hear a pin drop as Era walked over to the green and silver table and sat next to Draco. He smiled at her, then they turned their attentions back to the sorting. After the sorting, the food came and Era stuck to stuff she knew wouldn't hurt her stomach, which everyone noticed. Draco asked about it and she just said, "Greasy foods hurt my stomach if I eat it." Her housemates then noticed that Era was looking a little sick as Draco asked, "What's wrong?" Era smiled and just told them that she was a little too warm, which made everyone look at her in surprise. Shish. He chuckled and explained about being an ice mage, so her body preferred colder temperatures than what people were used to. One of the prefects laughed then said, "Then you'll love it in the dungeons where the dorms are. They can get pretty cold." Era smiled happily and then began to ask about classes and what they were like. Draco watched as Era literally charmed the older students and her fellow classmates in amusement. He had a feeling that he and Era would be considered the leaders of Slytherin by the end of the year. He then heard her laugh as she told them the stories about some kind of Muggle legend called the Guardians of Childhood. Draco listened in and was captivated just like the rest of the house as she told them about Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Sandman and the Easter Bunny. She then told them about the Spirit of Winter who was called Jack Frost and the legend concerning him. Everyone was in surprise as Era told of how Jack's magic was in all the snow and ice during the winter and that they say Jack's greatest wish was to be believed in so he could interact with people. Jack listened in, much to her amusement, as he hoped her stories about him and the other guardians would help them believe in him. She then sent a mental hug to her best friend who grinned and returned the gesture. The headmaster then stood up and said that they were about to sing the school song Cow. Sing Draco to ask, "Anyone mind if I put of a silencing ward?" Everyone shook their heads as Draco quickly put the ward up when everyone else started singing loudly and off-key. Era couldn't stop giggling at the twins who were singing a slow funeral march, and then they were led down to the dungeons where they met their head of house named Severus Snape. He laid down the rules and guidelines as he then dismissed them to sleep. Era noticed the professor was looking at her with an unreadable look and smiled at the man as she said, "Good night, Professor. I hope I have your class tomorrow." The prefects made it sound really neat. Snape's eyes widened in shock as she hurried upstairs to the room she had been assigned, and he then smiled as he thought, "It seems she is more like Lily than anything." Later that night, Era woke up for no reason at all and sat up as she wondered what woke her up. She looked around and then noticed a corner of darker shadows where the closet was. She smiled as he figured out what it was and gently whistled a little song she had always known. Somehow, the nightmare neighed softly as she got out of bed and walked over to the nightmare. The nightmare then nuzzled at her pockets to see if she had any sugar cubes, causing Era to realize that this was the nightmare from all that night so long ago. She giggled and said, "Sorry, I don't have any sugar cubes right now, but if I see you tomorrow night, I'll give you some, okay?" The nightmare neighed and nodded as it then nuzzled her. They then heard a voice speak softly behind them, "Well, it seems we meet again, little ice mage." She turned and came face to face with the man who had been with the nightmare on that night so long ago, causing her beam and hug the man as she asked, "What are you doing here at Hogwarts?" Pitch laughed softly and said, "Doing my job, little one." Era tilted her head cutely and said, "Your job?" Pitch smiled gently at her and said, "My name is Pitch Black, the Nightmare King, or in other words the Bogeyman." Era detected a bit of loneliness in his voice and hugged him again. Pitch smiled at the hug she gave him and then urged her towards the bed as he said, "Now it's time for you to go back to sleep, little ice mage." Era nodded as she crawled into bed and made to grab the covers when Pitch got them for her and tucked her in gently. She beamed at him then yawned as she wished him and the nightmare a good night. Pitch returned the gesture and then turned and left with his lead nightmare. He paused in the doorway of shadows to look back at the sweet child he felt connected to. For some reason, and smiled as he said, "Such belief from a child who shows no fear of me." The next day, Era was dressed and ready as she looked like a very studious student with her long waist length. Black hair in a tight French braid with her silver-white bangs swept to the side. She then grabbed her snowflake earrings Jack had made her with the matching choker that had a snowflake charm attached. She placed them on, then grabbed all her books as she headed downstairs to meet up with Draco. He raised an eyebrow at the matching jewelry but had to approve as it looked gorgeous on her and made the other girls look overdressed. They then headed for the Great Hall for breakfast. Era grinned when she got her schedule because it was potions for her first class, then transfiguration. She smiled. As her and Draco finished breakfast, then asked a perfect which way the potion classroom was. They quickly memorized the directions and then headed off to the classroom. They were the first ones there. Ian quickly got seats near the front of the class as other students started coming in. Snape then walked in with a sour look on his face and told them to be quiet when there was already no sound. He then quizzed Ronald Weasley on certain potion ingredients as Draco and Era quickly copied down the answers. 1 hour later, Draco and Era grabbed Neville and hurried to Transfiguration, where they entered the classroom together. They found no teacher, just a pretty tabby cat sitting on the desk. Era cooed at the cat and scratched behind its ear, gently causing a resonating purr from the cat. A then smiled and sat in her desk in between Draco and Neville. She told them that she was going to meditate until class started and then closed her eyes as she contacted Jack. Class started about 5 minutes later as Ronald came running into class and said, "Great, the teacher isn't here. I'm not late." Needless to say, all the students were shocked when the cat jumped off the desk and transformed into the strict teacher from last night. She then gave 10 points to Slytherin for kindness to animals and took 5 points away from Gryffindor. Ron sat down angrily as she began the lesson, and Era was fascinated by the lessons. The rest of her day swiftly passed, as did the weeks up until the day before Halloween. Era was easily the best in class when it came to practical work, while Hermione was the best at textbook work, and the two of them often tag-teamed their essays together with Neville and Draco in the library and found a system that worked. Meanwhile, around 11 p.m. on October 30th, Jack was flying his way towards Hogwarts as he brought an early winter to Scotland. He smiled as he landed and then followed his bond to Era where she was sleeping. He kissed her forehead gently and headed back outside to wait for daylight. Jack decided to explore the forest since he was waiting and found many beautiful sights in the forest. He explored until the sun came up and then headed back to the castle since it was a Saturday. He knew the other kids were going to have some fun in the snow while he hung out with Era today. He smirked as he heard excited whoops from the castle and quickly headed into the entrance hall to watch the kids come down. He soon saw the kids come down as they hurried to eat, then ran outside to play in the snow. Era then came out and beamed as she saw him and hurried towards him. They headed past the other children to a little used clearing where they sat down and chatted for about a good 3 hours. Jack noticed her getting tired and told her to head into the castle and take a nap, causing her to nod while she yawned. She trudged back up to the castle and headed to her dorm where she laid down for a nap. Severus came in to check room clean lines and noticed she had fallen asleep on the covers. He smiled and then eased her under the covers where she sighed and shifted to get comfy. Snape then turned out the light and closed the door as he headed down to the Halloween feast. Meanwhile, Jack blinked as an awful stench suddenly cut through the air, causing him to cover his nose at how bad it was. He then noticed a troll being led by an adult towards the castle and decided to follow the two. The man let the creature loose in the dungeons, then ran off somewhere after angering the troll. Jack followed the troll as it stumbled its way out of the dungeons and into a girl's bathroom where Jack heard a shriek of terror. Jack raced inside to find Hermione hiding in a stall from the troll, causing Jack to become angry that an adult did this on purpose without any regards to the children. He then summoned a mini blizzard in the room and had it encase the troll in a coffin of ice, but he knew it wouldn't hold the troll long as he then used he snow to write, "Get out now while he's frozen." Hermione did as the mysterious message said and got out as she raced down the hall and found Snape and McGonagall. She told them why she wasn't with he other Ravenclaws and that the troll had been frozen in place long enough for her to escape by a mysterious source. Jack then watched as Snape managed to knock out the troll and subdue it until the other teachers got there to help him. He sighed as he tried to figure out what adult could have let the troll into the school because they had been wearing a cloak over their face. He then left after the troll was gone and decided to explore the castle. Jack wandered around the castle as he walked past the classrooms up to the third floor where he noticed Snape coming out of the room that the students had been banned from. He opened the door a little and slipped inside to find a Cerberus staring right at him. Jack went paler than usual as he slowly backed up and didn't meet the animal's eyes. He then slipped out the door and shut it tight. He turned around and came face to face with Severus Snape, who looked at him in surprise and shock. Snape and Jack blinked at the same time when Snape asked, "Who are you?" Jack was stunned that an adult of all people was able to see him. Snape asked again and Jack smiled as he said, "Jack Frost at your service." Snape raised an eyebrow and said, "So, you're then one that Era won't stop talking about." Jack blushed as Snape then asked him to follow the potion master to his office so they could talk. Jack did as he asked and followed the professor to his office where Snape invited him to sit down. Jack did and Snape then asked, "How long have you and Era been friends?" Jack smiled and said, "Since she was 5, sir." Snape raised an eyebrow and then asked how they met, causing Jack to tell him everything that had happened to Era. Snape listened in horror as he heard what Dumbledore had done so Era couldn't escape the Dursleys and cursed a blue streak. Jack then asked, "Is there something about the spell we should know?" Snape nodded then started to explain. Monday, November 1st. Era smiled as Jack messed around in the Great Hall near Dumbledore. The old man was in a constant cold spot causing him to shiver uncontrollably and Jack kept making the headmaster's food freezing cold. Era was giggling a lot by the time she had to go to class. Jack watched her go and then narrowed his eyes at Ronald, who he could hear telling lies about Era going dark. He then snuck up behind the rude boy and froze his underwear and pants to the point Ronald could barely walk. Snape watched in amusement as the youngest Weasley yelped and Jack gave him thumbs up. Jack then hurried to Era's side in the history of magic class. Era smiled at him as she got a yawn and Jack laughed as he decided to entertain her in the class. Era looked curious to what he was doing when the classroom suddenly became a little colder bit by bit and a window was opened by him. He called in the snow and made little snow sculptures on everyone's desks. Draco's eyes went wide at the dragon on his desk while Crabbe and Goyle started to play with their squirrel and chipmunk sculptures. Era giggled as her sculpture was Jack's wolf form and she picked it up and hugged it right in front of him as she said, "I shall call him Squishy and he'll be mine to love forever and ever." Jack blushed at that as she smirked up at him and then said, "I'll love him forever and ever because he is my Squishy." Era watched as Jack's poor face looked like a blueberry from blushing hard and grinned as she placed the cherry on top by kissing the wolf's forehead. Poor Jack passed out from embarrassment, causing her to have a giggle fit for the rest of class. Jack was awake by the time class was over and Era kept teasing him by saying, "My Squishy." Through their mental bond, Jack couldn't stop blushing every time she said that, which caused her to have a case of the giggles. Jack finally got her to stop teasing him and just smiled as she gave him a playful pout. Ronald then stormed up to her and said, "I challenge you to a wizard's duel tonight at midnight." Era gave him a bored look and said, "I decline. I have done nothing to you that warrants this kind of response." Ronald growled and then called her a name that had Jack seeing red. "You're nothing but a mudblood freak." Era turned towards him then let her ice magic surround her as she said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones but words cut deeper than you think." Ronald laughed and said, "Oh, I'm so scared of a little mudblood like you. You couldn't hurt a fly." Just then McGonagall placed a hand on Ronald's shoulder and said, "Ronald Weasley, your mother will be hearing about your mouth and you insulting another student again." Era watched as Ron was marched off by McGonagall then headed to see Professor Snape like he wanted her to after classes. She knocked politely at the door and was told to come in as she pushed open the door. Snape asked her to sit down as he nodded to Jack, who was leaning against the wall near Era. Era looked surprised as she asked, "Professor, can you actually see Jack?" Snape nodded in amusement and said, "I have always believed in the stories of him and the Guardians do the fact that in every myth and legend has some basis in the truth." Era smiled brightly as Jack chuckled. Snape then asked her about the day Dumbledore recaptured her, causing Aira to tell him everything she could remember. Snape raised an eyebrow at hearing that Jack had 2 animagus forms they found about that day due to the spell that hit Jack. He then asked if she had ever found her animal spirit or spirits. Aira nodded and said, I haven't attempted to transform yet though, so Methy Ing kept telling me to wait, and plus the Dursleys would have told Dumbledore. Snape then smiled slyly and said, well, at least here I can help you, under the old coot's nose, to transform. Aira's eyes went wide and she thanked Snape happily as he told her that their first lesson would begin now. 3 weeks later, Jack smirked as Aira grabbed the CD player he had found in Japan that ran on magic and her favorite CDs. She then grabbed Draco, the twins, Neville and Hermione, and took them to the Great Hall since no one was in there. Hermione looked curious as to what she had and gasped as Aira revealed the stereo and explained how it worked. Hermione was drooling when she noticed the CDs and squealed at the top one as she grabbed it and said, we have to teach the guys this one. Aira looked and started laughing her butt off as she nodded. They then taught the guys the dance quickly before introducing the song to them, and they guys then got in a line with the girls as Jack was above them. And the song started playing as they danced to it. Oppa Gangnam Style, Najanun T Tossaround Inganjayajan Yoha. Hiopi Hanjanui Yo Uriel Anun Pumgyuk Inun Yoha Bami Amyan Simjangi Tteugeo Jinun Yoha. Garian Banjan Inun Yoha. Nainun Sanai. Najanun Neomankam T Tossaround Garian Sanai Kiopi Sikido Jun Wanshyat T Terinun Sanai. Bami Amyan Simjangi Teojaborinun Sanai Garian Sanai. Erumdao Sarangsaro o Gare Neo He Gare Baro Neo He Erumdao Sarangsaro o Gare Neo He Gare Baro Neo He Jigumbudio Gal Dekaji Gabulka. Oppa Gangnam Style, Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Eheheh. Jungsuki Boyjiman Nol Tta. En nonun yoha ita sipumyan mukyadian miori punun yoha garyojiman wenmanan nocholbota yahan yoha garian gamgachogan yoha. Nainun sanai. Gemyana Boyjiman Nol Ttaen nonun sanai. Chitega. Domaian wanjen mikiobiorинun sanai. Gyunyukbota sasongi ultung bultunghan sanai garian sanai. Erumdao Sarangsaro o Gare Neo, Hey, Gare Baro Neo, Hey Erumdao Sarangsaro o Gare Neo, Hey, Gare Baro Neo. Hey Jigumbudio Gal Dekaji Gabulka Oppa Gangnam Style, Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Eheheh. Tdiwainun nam geu we nainun nam. Baby. Nainun mwol jom ainun nam tdiwainun nam geu we nainun nam baby. Nainun mwol jom en. Un nam, you know what I'm saying. Oppa Gangnam Style. Eheheh. Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Oppa Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Op, 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 Op. Eheheh. Oppa Gangnam Style. English translation. Oppa is Gangnam Style. A girl who is warm and humanal during the day. A classy girl who know how to enjoy the freedom of a cup of coffee. A girl whose heart gets hotter when night comes. A girl with that kind of twist. I'm a guy who is as warm as you during the day. A guy who one-shots his coffee before it even cools down. A guy whose heart bursts when night comes. That kind of guy. Beautiful, lovable, yes you, hey, yes you, hey beautiful, lovable, yes you, hey, now let's go until the end. Oppa is Gangnam Style, Oppa is Gangnam Style, Oppa is Gangnam Style. Sexy Lady, Oppa is Gangnam Style, Sexy Lady. Oh. A girl who looks quiet but plays when she plays. A girl who puts her hair down when the right time comes. A girl who covers herself but is more sexy than a girl who bears it all, a sensible girl like that. I'm a guy. A guy who seems calm but plays when he plays. A guy who goes completely crazy when the right time comes. A guy who has bulging ideas rather than muscles. That kind of guy. Beautiful, lovable. Yes you, hey, yes you, hey beautiful, lovable. Yes you, hey, yes you, hey now let's go until the end. Oppa is Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style Oppa is Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style Oppa is Gangnam Style. Sexy lady, Oppa is Gangnam Style. Sexy lady oh. On top of the running man is the flying man, baby baby. I'm a man who knows a thing or two. On top of the running man is the flying man, baby baby. I'm a man who knows a thing or two. You know what I'm saying. Oppa is Gangnam Style. Sexy lady, Oppa is Gangnam Style. Sexy lady oh. They were all laughing as they danced and were unaware of the teachers that were watching them in amusement. Severus was trying so hard not to laugh while Dumbledore was actually snickering with McGonagall. Finally the kids noticed and momentarily stopped until Professor Flitwick joined in the fun by doing the dance beside them. Era grinned and started dancing again with others as they all started sing the English parts of the song. Needless to say, Draco, Neville and the twins had a blast doing the dances that Era and Hermione had taught them. The next day, November 19th, Jack watched as Era signed up to stay for the holidays and smiled softly as he decided to get her something for Christmas. He then sighed and tried to think of something to give her. That would be very special, yet it wouldn't be taken away from her or could be easily hidden from the Dursleys. November 21st, Snape led Era and Jack into the forest under the pretense of having her gather potion ingredients. They wandered deep in the forest to a clearing where Snape turned and asked, "Are you ready to do this?" Era took a deep breath and nodded as she said, "I'm ready to undergo the transformation." Snape nodded and then asked her to stand in the middle of the clearing. Era did as he asked and then he began walking her through the change. After about 3 minutes, a playful grown snow leopard was where Era had been a few minutes ago. Snape was amused as she managed to ambush Jack and steal his staff. Jack was now chasing her around the clearing as he leapt for Era and his staff. He wound up eating snow as she dashed away at the last second. Snape was laughing as Jack brought his face up out of the snow and he had the classic face wash look on it. Era turned and went back into the classic, "Play with me" pose as her tail lashed back and forth in amusement. Jack then grinned and promptly turned into his wolf form as she took off running clumsily due to the staff in her mouth. Jack soon caught up and managed to get the staff as he took off running while Era chased him happily. Snape let them play a bit longer then called out to Era, "Era, will you please return to the middle of the clearing and try transforming into your second animal form without returning to human form?" Era nodded and began to focus hard as she transformed little by little into an old world frost unicorn. Snape was pleased as she trotted around the clearing and then asked her to return to human form so they could gather the ingredients they need to convince Dumbledore about what they had been doing. Era smiled as they gathered the ingredients and found the activity relaxing. Snape praised her for her neat cuts that wouldn't hurt the plants, causing her to beam. Jack then told them it was getting dark, so they all headed back up to the castle. They made it back in time for supper, which was good for Era because she was starving. Jack smiled as he watched her eat, then sighed to her that he had to go see someone about something. She smiled at him carefully and wished him luck as Jack nodded and flew into the night. That night, Pitch decided to visit that delightful little girl at Hogwarts again and quickly made his way through the shadows to her room. He had just stepped into the room when she suddenly sat up and looked in his direction. She smiled brightly as she said, "You came back." Pitch laughed softly and then walked over as they talked about small stuff for about an hour. Pitch then noticed she was forcing herself to stay awake and sighed. He gently got her to lie down and smiled as she quickly fell asleep despite his presence. He then on a whim leaned down and kissed her forehead. He was just about to leave her when he heard her sigh in her sleep, "Daddy." Pitch felt his heart break at the word but didn't know why or why he felt he had met the young girl before. He then walked back into the shadows just as the Sandman's sand drifted over her head. Oh, give her the pleasant dreams she so deserved. Pairing. Jack Frost and Femme. Harry. Timeline. Starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Femme. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. Ch.5. Era woke early the next day and quickly got ready for the school day as she wondered who Jack went to go see. Jack was nervous as he had never gone seeking this particular guardian, and ever since the blizzard of 68, they exactly haven't gotten along. He called the guardian's name as he entered the area where the guardian usually hung out during the slow season. Bunnymund then appeared as he glared at Jack and said, "What do you want, Frostbite?" Jack sighed and said, "I didn't come to pick a fight, I kinda need some help with a gift for someone, and I don't know what the hell to get them." Bunnymund looked surprised and then said, "Why me? Why not go to North?" Jack blushed and mumbled something, causing Bunnymund to grin and said, "What was that again? I can't quite hear you yet." Jack sent a playful glare his way, then sighed and said, "It's for a girl. Not Toothina. I hope she is the only female spirit of our group." Jack blinked and shook his head in embarrassment, causing the rabbit to look surprised. Then Bunnymund then looked at Jack and said, "Mate, unless you tell me who this for, I can't really help you." Jack's face lit up in a blush as he said, "Well, it's for a human girl that is actually able to see me." The Easter Bunny looked at Jack in shock as Jack just kinda looked sheepish. Bunnymund then started laughing, causing Jack to sigh and start to leave. Bunnymund stopped him and said, "Sorry about that, mate. It's just, I never expected that you of all people would want to give a gift to a human child." Jack then sighed and said, "Era deserves something good in her life." Bunnymund cut him off as he then said sharply, "Era. As in Era Potter." Jack nodded as Bunnymund then said, "We've been trying to help her for years, but her relatives took all our gifts for her and either burned them or gave them to their son." Jack growled then said, "Well, the gifts I usually give her are small enough to be hidden." Bunnymund looked at him in shock, then turned and started banging his head as he said, "Stupid, stupid, stupid. How did we not think of that?" Jack then said, "You're kidding, I thought of something you guys didn't." Bunnymund sighed and said, "It never occurred to us. North usually had sent things she needed. I made eggs just for her and hid them in places she hid from her cousin, and too. Othina did her best to give her small treats. The only thing they couldn't do was take the dreams Sandy gives her." Jack nodded as he said, "So you think you can help?" Bunnymund chuckled and nodded as he asked, "Is there anything she would like just for herself?" Jack thought about and then his eyes lit up as he said, "Plushies. She loves plush toys, but because of the Dursleys." Bunnymund grinned and said, "I think the others would be interested in this. Why not give her plushies in the shape of us, the Immortals?" Jack grinned as he thought about it and said, "Why don't we doing something like?" He then whispered into the rabbit's ear, causing a slow grin to form as he laughed and said, "That's perfect." Meanwhile, back with Era. Era sighed as she tried to understand the essay she had been given by McGonagall with Hermione's help but couldn't focus. She sighed and stood as she told Hermione that she was going for a walk to clear her head. Hermione nodded as her and Draco debated music that they liked. Era stepped into the hall outside the library and began to walk back to the nice cold dungeons when Ronald came up to her and said, "The divination teacher wants to meet you, for some odd reason." Era blinked and then looked for any signs of lying but didn't find any, so she followed him through the castle to a tower. He let her go up first as he smirked, then he heard her about to see all the teacher as he snuck up and knocked her out with a large heavy book. He then hurried out the trap door to close and lock it securely. He smirked and said, "Can't handle warm temperatures, my ass. We'll see who the liar is now." He then ran off to do his daily bullying, unaware that Era would be near death when she would finally be discovered up there. 2 hours later, Snape hurried to ask Sybil, the divination teacher, if she had seen his wayward student when he found her trying to get into her tower but couldn't because she forgot her wand in the tower. He unlocked the door for her and he thanked him as she went up as he made to follow, only to hear a shrill scream. He bolted up the ladder to find Sybil checking Era, who was unconscious. She looked up at him and hissed, "Get her to Poppy now. The poor child's been out of her normal element for so long that she could die." Severus growled as he hurried to the ladder with Era in his arms while Sybil called the hospital wing ahead of time to alert Poppy. Poppy was waiting anxiously when he came running in and quickly examined her. Poppy then growled viciously as she read the results of her examination and quickly told Snape to fill the tub with ice water in the hospital wing bathroom, as they had to cool her down as soon as possible for her body temperature to become normal. Meanwhile, Mim was so shocked at Ronald Weasley's attempt to willingly harm Era and quickly decided the boy need to learn a lesson. He contacted Pitch, who was in shock. Then he grew angry at the fact another child actually tried to harm their classmate and almost wound up killing her. Pitch nodded at the task he had been given and headed to the Gryffindor first-year dorm room. He easily found the boy that dare harm the one person who believed in him and his nightmares without fear. He touched the boy's dream as the Sandman made to stop him. Mim managed to stop him, then told him what happened and that Pitch was to give the boy nightmares about what he did for a week. The Sandman watched the boy in disgust and disbelief that he was sleeping with no remorse while the girl he had harmed was very ill because of what he had done. Pitch then nodded dead to his once-time friend and got to work with giving the boy nightmares for the rest of the night. The Sandman did his rounds of the castle quickly and saved Era for last like always as he slipped into the hospital wing. He smiled sadly at seeing her in the bed as her breathing was a little labored and sweat ran down her face gently due to the fever she developed. He then left her the sweetest dreams he could and turned to find Pitch behind him with a worried expression as he looked at the child. The Sandman looked at Pitch, who noticed and said, "She is the one child that is safe from me. She also helps that my nightmares think of her as a filly to care for." The Sandman looked at him in amusement as he managed to say that Pitch was going a little soft. Pitch smirked and said, "She is the only child that believes me without the fear most children have." Pitch chuckled at the look on the Sandman's face and said, "It's true. Have I ever told a lie about a child believing in me?" The Sandman had to admit he had a point and shook his head as he went to continue his rounds. Pitch watched him leave, then walked over to Era, who was lost in peaceful dreams. He watched over her for nearly the entire night as she slept and sighed as he puzzled over why he cared so much about this child. He finally left to do his duty as the Nightmare King, but not before whispering in Era's ear, "Please get better soon, little ice mage." Soon after he left, Jack finally arrived in the hospital wing with Severus as the potions master told him what they had pieced together about what happened. Jack was furious but kept a tight rein on his anger as he didn't want to freeze the castle from the inside. He looked at Era lying so still on the bed and gently walked over as he gently grabbed her hand. CK was feeling like it was his fault she had been hurt, all because he hadn't been there to help her. Snape noticed and softly said, "Jack, this is in no way your fault. It's the fault of the person who thought they can get away with this." Jack then said, "But I should have been there to help her. She could have died from the heat in the room." Snape sighed and then told Jack again that it wasn't Hi's fault, but the fault lied directly on the person who did harm Era. 2 days later, Jack sighed as Era was still passed out from what happened and they were no closer to finding out who had tried to harm Era. He then felt her hand twitch as he looked at her and saw her eyes fluttering. Jack called her name softly as she slowly opened her eyes to give them time to adjust. Jack looked relieved as she looked at him with a smile and gently squeezed his hand. Snape then came into the room and saw that she was awake. He walked over as he called for Poppy and said to Era, "You've been out of it for almost 3 days, young lady." Era looked surprised and then said in a slightly raspy voice, "What happened?" "The last thing I remember was Ronald leading me to the divination room because he said the teacher wanted to meet me for some reason." Jack froze at hearing the youngest male Weasley's name while Snape literally growled. Poppy, who had arrived in time to hear what she had to say, was furious. Snape then went to the fireplace in Poppy's office and called McGonagall to the office by saying they now knew who attacked Era. McGonagall was soon there and asked, "Severus, you sounded absolutely furious over the flow." Snape then told her what Era had told them and McGonagall was furious. She had been trying to stop Ronald's bullying, but what he had done to Era was completely uncalled for. They both turned to face Era when Snape noticed Jack was gone and quickly hoped Jack wouldn't go too far with payback on Ronald. Meanwhile, Jack snuck into the Gryffindor male dorms and quick. Lee found Ronald was the only one left in his dorm. Jack grinned evilly, then focused as he froze the bed sheets quickly in Ronald's PJ pants. He also left a bunch of frost on the bed for good measure. Jack watched as Ronald then noticed he was freezing cold and sat up in shock just as McGonagall walked in. She paused at seeing all the frost and ice, then told him to get dressed as they were going to see the headmaster. Ronald asked what for when he had done nothing wrong, causing McGonagall to say, "We know what you did to Miss Potter, young man." Ronald froze and then tried to deny the accusation. McGonagall just told him to get dressed and they would soon find out. Needless to say, Ronald eventually had to be given truth drops along Era to see who was telling the truth. Jack watched in glee as he heard Ron confess to the attack on Era. Era was then told to leave the office and go back to the dorms to rest. Jack was with her every step of the way back to the dorms. She smiled as he tucked her in and told he had to grab what he forgot at the place he went. Era nodded and wished him a safe and happy flight. Jack nodded in amusement, then quickly kissed her forehead as he told he would see her soon with a blush on his cheeks. By the next day Jack was back as he carefully hid her presence in a secret spot he had discovered by accident. Era was in classes, so he went outside and made it snow a bit more so that her first holidays at Hogwarts would be a fluffy white snow Christmas. December 19th. Era grinned as she watched her friends go to battle with the twins in a classic snowball fight. They weren't expecting her to play because she had been finishing a couple essays. She had finished them early and was now hiding behind a tree as Jack laughed at her plan and quick. Kaylee gave her enough ammo to snipe her friends off. Her first victim was Draco as he turned and he wound up face planting into the snow to everyone's amusement. Fred and George were then sniped off using them to make perfect indents of their faces in their snow fort. Hermione and Neville were laughing when they were suddenly hit in the face each by a snowball. The group all started looking where the snowballs came from when they were all pummeled again in the face with a snowball and heard very familiar laughter. Needless to say, Era had a ton of fun running from the snowballs her friend fired at her while Jack laughed his ass off. They then all marched into the castle to get hot chocolate and warm up a bit. Jack smiled as he was glad that Era had friends her own age for once that no one could take away. He then thought about what waited her Christmas day and grinned as he tried to imagine her reaction. Deck.24th. Era sighed as Mim had asked Jack to do a white Christmas in Cana. So he had left with the promise of being back by the morning. Era looked out at the sea of white snow outside from her window seat when she heard a neigh and smiled. She turned to see the lead Nig, Mare and Pitch standing there behind her. She giggled as she ran over to hug Pitch and she then said, "Merry Christmas, Pitch." Pitch smiled as he returned the gesture as he looked at the Nightmare tea. Hat was nuzzling the young girl happily as Era fed it a few sugar cubes. He then said, "I have a surprise for you, little ice mage." Era's eyes lit up as she started to bounce excitedly, causing Pitch to laugh. He then whispered in her ear about what her surprise was, causing her to rush for her coat and boots. Pitch then used the shadows to transport them outside as the Nightmare followed. Pitch then smiled at Era's shining eyes as Pitch then lifted her onto the back of his lead Nightmare and climbed up behind her as he told her to hold on tight. Era did as he asked and clung to the Nightmare's mane when the Nightmare started running, causing her to squeal in delight. The Nightmare then leapt into the sky as she ran as fast as she could over the school grounds. Pitch low get at Era's excitement as they flew over the Forbidden Forest and then went into a wide open field where they landed, and the Nightmare raced through the deep snow as it kicked the snow up. Era was overjoyed as they even raced on top of the lake. Pitch was chuckling as Era couldn't resist and started singing. Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to laugh and sing a sleighing song tonight. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. A day or two ago, I thought I'd take a ride, and soon Miss Fanny Bright was seated by my side. The horse was lean and lank, misfortune seemed his lot. We got into a drifted bank and then we got upset. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Yeah. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Needless to say, she had a blast on the second time singing it because Pitch even joined in while the nightmare formed little jingle bells on its mane and tail to add to the festiveness. They were heading back to the castle when Era was starting to nod off in Pitch's arms. Hi. TCH smiled and held her tight as he smoothed the hair from her face. He couldn't help but chuckle at her sleeping so peacefully in his arms as he then snuck her back up to her bed and on a whim, kiss her forehead as she sighed happily with a word that once again warmed his heart after hearing it the second time. Daddy. Pitch then left his gift of a black leopard plushie on her pillow for her to see when she woke up. He snuck out of the room quietly and headed back for his lair as the Sandman worked his magic to give her a very sweet dream. The next morning, Era woke up to Jack's voice as He smiled at her and gestured towards the end of the bed. She looked confused until he said, "Don't you want to open your presents?" Era blinked as it registered in her mind what he had said and looked towards the end of the bed where a bunch of presents were nestled. She blinked in shock and said, "Presents? I got presents." Jack nodded as he saw the joy in her eyes as she quickly started to open them. The presents she got were as followed. Weasley twins. A book on pranks you could do with ice and snow. Hermione. A student planner and sugar-free treats. Neville. A book on rare magical plants. Draw. Co. A history of the Potter family and a box of chocolate frogs. Molly Weasley. A beautiful hand-knit sweater that was icy green with silver and a plate of homemade fudge. Era then found a gift from each of the guardians that she quickly opened. North. A book on ballet dancing and icy blue ballet shoes. Toothina. A small ring with an icy blue fairy holding a tooth bunnymund, an Easter egg locket. D. One in icy blue and silver Sandman, a hardened sand sculpture of a running unicorn. Jack smiled as her smile grew bigger and bigger when she found Jack's presents for her. She slowly opened them and found a series of plushies of the guardians, but they were in the form of animals. North was a big cuddly polar bear, Toothina was a brightly colored hummingbird, Sandman was an eagle, and Bunnymund was himself, but Era's favorite was the frost dragon Jack plushie. She squealed happily at seeing the plush toys and quickly made to put them on her pillow when she noticed the gift from Pitch. She grinned and also placed it with the others as she hugged Jack happily. She then said thank you when she noticed one final gift that had no name on it, which sent off slight warning bells in her head. She opened it and decided to check it over for curses and spells. As she pulled it out to find a silvery cloak, she found a compulsion charm on it but nothing else, so she took the charm off and then put it on as she wrapped it around her body. Jack yelped with wide eyes as Era looked down to find her body was missing. Jack then poked her where her shoulder should have been, causing her to say ow. Jack THN grinned as Era did when they realized it was an invisibility cloak. A little note then fell to the floor as they read it. Era giggled as Jack and her snuck outside and Jack wrapped an arm around her waist as he said, "Let's fly." Bright eyes. Era whooped for joy as they took off and did tons of tricks and dives that would have made a stunt pilot jealous. Era laughed happily as she spent time with her best friend in the entire world. Jack smiled as she then said, "Let's go faster, Jack. Please." Jack laughed as they did just that until Era was growing tired. Jack then carried her to her bed without anyone noticing and laid her down when he noticed the black leopard plushie and wondered who had given her that plushie. Meanwhile, Pitch hummed a soft Christmas carol under his breath as he read a book that a particular mortal had wrote. Pitch had to admit that this Stephen King had an excellent imagination as he read the book called It. Pitch then heard his lead nightmare jingling around with her jingle bells yet again. He sighed in exasperated amusement but couldn't deny his lead nightmare a bit of holiday fun. His thoughts turned back to the child he was taken with and a fond smile made its way over his face. He sighed as he looked around his home and had to admit it was nice to have someone to care about him for once. He then smiled as he remembered what Era had said in her sleep. He didn't know why it warmed his heart with a familiar feeling, but he had to admit he liked it. Meanwhile, Era and her friends that had stayed were now getting her CD player ready so they see old play modern Christmas music at the feast. Neville then found a CD with a Christmas version of one of their favorite dances and grinned as he held it up to them. Era got what he was thinking and laughed as she nodded. Neville grinned as they all grabbed their Santa hats that were in their house colors and put them on while he quickly put the CD on. Needless to say, they had a blast listening to the song as they did the famous dance that goes with it and sang along with it. Oh oh oh, it's Christmas time, yeah do 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 ooh. Yeah 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 yeah, we wonder, are you ready for Christmas time? Show. In the air and the sun will shine square the light. Santa Claus is here tonight, here tonight. So let us celebrate wah eh. 'Cause everything is great. Feel it, la la la, sing with me this Christmas melody ooh oh eh. Dance to the beat. Wave your hands together. Come feel the heat forever and forever listen and learn. It is time for prancing Christmas is here with caramel dancing ooh oh 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 ooh oh oh oh. Ooh oh 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 ooh oh oh oh. This is the time of year where we're having fun. When you give a gift to a special one. Boy and girl, it's Christmas all around the world oh wah eh. So let us celebrate, sing wah eh, 'cause everything is great. Feel it, la la la, sing with me this Christmas melody so come and dance to the beat, wave your hands together. Come feel the heat forever and forever listen and learn. It is time for prancing Christmas is here with caramel dancing, dance to the beat. Wave your hands together. Come feel the heat forever and forever listen and learn. It is time for prancing Christmas is here with caramel dancing, Merry Christmas ah, 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 ooh oh oh ooh oh oh ooh oh oh ooh oh oh. So come and dance to the beat. Wave your hands together. Come feel the heat forever and forever listen and learn. It is time for prancing Christmas is here with caramel dancing, dance to the beat. Wave your hands together. Come feel the heat forever and forever listen and learn. It is time for Rancing Christmas is here with caramel dancing. Draco, the twins and Neville were laughing along with Jack as Era was still singing after the end of the song, causing her to blush and stick her tongue out at them. She then was playfully swatted at by Draco, who snickered and said, "You're such a goof." Era just giggled as she dodged the swat and said, "Then you must be one too for hanging out with me." They soon were ready to eat the Christmas dinner as the twins had to admit the look on Era's face when she had opened a wizard cracker for the first time was priceless. Jack then grinned as he realized it was the perfect temperature for him to create a very light snow in the Great Hall. He quickly tapped his staff lightly on the floor and watched as everyone except Snape and Era looked up in confused delight. Even Dumbledore was wondering who made it snow as he made subtle plans on controlling Era and so guide her towards the light until he had no more use for her. Era was exhausted when she made it to her dorm room and was out like a light as soon as she lay down on her bed. Jack smiled and decided to do something he hadn't done in a while. He transformed into his Arctic wolf form and jumped up on the bed as he curled up at her feet. He yawned and laid his head down as he then proceeded to go into a light sleep. Chapter 7. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolf's Rain. Rules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Fem. Harry. Timeline. Starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Fem. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter or any songs that appear. All she owns is her own version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. A.N. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it. It means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Ch.7. Jack yawned as he wondered what woke him when he noticed Era getting out of bed with a glazed look in her eyes. He quickly changed back to human form and touched her, causing her to wake up and say, "Jack. What's going on? Why am I out of my bed?" Jack told her what happened and she shuddered as she said, "For some reason I felt like I was floating, and felt really warm." Jack sighed and said, "I'll keep you from leaving if it happens again, okay?" Jack kept his promise as it continued about 4 more times that night until the sun rose over the horizon. Jack was ghtly exhausted as he watched her sleep peacefully finally. He sighed as he looked at her and smiled as he wished there was a chance that she could escape the Dursleys and join him in traveling. He saw Tea at the end of her bed and yawned as he laid back and fell into a peaceful sleep. Snape came in to check on them and grinned as he got the most amusing idea ever. He quickly set up the prank and set a camera that was easily hidden to capture the result of his little joke. 3 hours later, Era sighed happily as she snuggled into the nice coolness she could feel. She then opened her eyes and saw me face to face with Jack, who was fast asleep under the covers with her. The resounding yell and push caused Jack to tumble out of the bed with a shocked look on his face as he asked what happened. Ira then asked, "When the hell did you crawl under the covers?" Poor Jack was totally confused as he said, "But I fell asleep at the end of the bed." Era blinked then said, "Then how do you explain you being under the covers with me?" Jack blushed as he said, "I honestly have no idea." Era sighed in amusement as she figured out someone was playing a trick on her and Jack. Jack was looking highly embarrassed as Era chuckled and then said, "Someone is playing a Boxing Day trick on us, and there is only one other person who can see and touch you." Jack quickly got what she was saying and started ahhing as he still had a bit of a blush on his face. Era then said, "I think we should repay the kindness, don't you think so?" Jack smirked and then they quickly began to plot a payback prank on Snape. Meanwhile, at the Burrow, Ronald was furious at being suspended for a harmless joke and his mother was furious with him. He growled as he thought it was all Era's fault he was in this mess instead of taking responsibility for what he had done. He grumbled as he did his homework at the kitchen table where his mother could watch him the whole time to make sure he was getting it done. Ronald was also tired because of the horrid nightmares he kept getting whenever he slept. Somehow he thought Era was causing the nightmares and was planning to get back at her. Meanwhile back at Hogwarts, Pay checked his coffee for any signs of prank potions and found none despite the way that Era was giggling and the look on Jack's face was certainly something to be wary of. He sighed then started to eat his food when he suddenly stood against his will and started to sing as his robes changed to bright pink. "I feel pretty, oh, so pretty. I feel pretty and witty and bright. And I pity any girl who isn't me tonight. I feel charming, oh, so charming. It's alarming how charming I feel. And so pretty, that I hardly can believe I'm real. See the pretty girl in that mirror there. Who can that attractive girl be? Such a pretty face, such a pretty dress, such a pretty smile, such a pretty me. I feel stunning and entrancing. Feel like running and dancing for joy, for I'm loved by a pretty wonderful boy." Quote, the whole school cracked up at him singing that song he recognized from West Side Story. Once the spell wore off, he knew from the way Jack was laughing that it had been the winter spirit and Era to prank him. He then said, "If I find the one who did this, I'll have them scrubbing the bed pans in the hospital wing for the next 3 months. The grossed out look on everyone's faces nearly made him laugh as he sat down while trying not to smile. He then noticed Jack looking at him in amusement and they gave each other slight nods to acknowledge the pranks to each other. Later Era was called into his office as he asked to sit down and if she would like some tea. Era nodded as she asked for her usual peppermint tea and Snape smiled as he handed her a cup. He then looked at her in amusement as he asked, "So what made you pick that song?" Era giggled and said, "I went for humor rather than humiliate. Then again it was a close one between the songs, Barbie Girl by Aqua or I Feel So Pretty." Snape snickered in amusement and said, "Well done, I would have never thought to check my food." Era grinned and said, "Actually it wasn't in your food at all, it was the chocolate frog we gave you before breakfast. It had a timed charm on it." Snape started laughing and said, "At least it wasn't one of your father's humiliating pranks that he used to play in school." Era just smiled and then sighed as she said, "Professor, does Ronald have to be allowed back into Hogwarts?" Snape looked at her and could see her hands trembling a little. He then told her, "Unless he makes another attempt to harm you, I'm afraid yes." Era sighed and said, "I just have a really bad feeling about him." Snape sighed and then patted her head as he told her not to worry about it for now. Era nodded as they began talking about simple things such as the potion essays Snape had assigned to talking about the weather outside. Jack then came in with a sad look on his face, causing Era to look at him in sad understanding. He then said, "Mim needs me to go to America for a while." Era nodded and said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine, okay." Jack nodded then left again to do as Mim asked. New Year's Eve quickly passed and classes started again. Era did her best to avoid Ronald, who seemed to take up stalking her much to her dislike. Ronald watched her as she ducked out of sight and hurried to catch her, only to find out she had disappeared into thin air. He growled and stomped off as Era watched from under her invisibility cloak and softly sighed in relief. She then went the opposite direction of him and hurried to her class. She was already sitting with her friends when Ronald came in, so he couldn't even sit near her. She sighed in exasperation as he tried to bully someone for a chair near her but was refused. Era was the first one out of the class and she hurried to the Slytherin common room before Ronald could follow her. Ronald was furious. He just wanted to make that girl disappear so everything would go back to normal. He knew he had to act fast the next day since it was Saturday tomorrow and he would take her and dump her where no one would be able to find her, in the forest. He began to plan as he let out an evil laugh with an insane gleam to his eyes. He walked to his dorm where everyone started whispering about how he almost killed their so-called savior. He growled as he wonders why he was only to know she was going dark and it was best to get rid of her. The next day, Era was leaving her room with a yawn as she had just woken up when she heard someone behind her seconds before she was hit over the head. The last thing she thought was, "Not again." Ronald grinned evilly as he picked her up and quickly made his way outside through a secret tunnel he had found. He trudged his way into the forest and went to the spot he had picked out where he dumped her and then tied a thick rope around her ankle with a very difficult knot. He then tied the other end to a tree just out of her reach. Behind some sharp thorns, he laughed as he hurried away in the wrong direction and went deeper into the forest to the point he was completely lost. 10 minutes later, Era woke up on the ground and made to stand and walk when she fell flat on her stomach with an "ow." She realized where she was and that someone had tied her to a large tree by her ankle. She then tried calling out for help with hopes of being near the castle, but no one answered. Era then tried to undo the knot, but it proved to be too difficult to untie. She cursed for forgetting her wand in her dorm room and she knew even if she called Jack, he wouldn't be able to help her in time. Era waited patiently for help to come for a long time. When she noticed it was starting to get dark, she sighed and prayed for someone to find her before something dangerous in the forest did. Mim had just risen to his highest point when he noticed Era and Ronald in the forest and put two and two together. He growled softly at Ronald as he gently touched the boy's mind and found he was hoping that Era had been killed. Mim then had a perfectly evil idea to teach Ronald a lesson. He got in touch with the Sandman and Pitch and asked them to work together so that they could teach Ronald a lesson on respecting others and not harming them. Pitch and Sandy looked at each other then grinned evilly as they asked if they had free reign, and Mim said, "Make it so he knows not to mess with Era again and that he doesn't die, other than that yes." Ellipsis quote. Pitch laughed evilly as he looked at Sandy and said, "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Sandy nodded as they quickly headed down to the forest and heard a couple teachers calling the two students names. Pitch then noticed a teacher looking straight at them and nodded to the man. Who walked over after telling the other teachers he would look in the direction of the spirits. Snape walked over to the two and said, "You must two of the other spirits she talks about. Do you know where my student is?" Pitch and Sandy looked at each other and nodded as Pitch said, "You look for the boy, we'll get Era to safety." Snape nodded as he thanked them then headed off to find Ron. Sandy went to get Era while Pitch went to try and scare Ronald straight or into insanity, whatever came first. Pitch soon found him and grinned evilly as he barely registered his thoughts. "I'll teach you to hurt my little girl." Needless to say, Ronald was screaming bloody murder as the biggest spider he had ever seen attacked him. He ran screaming straight towards the teachers as a black werewolf. LF and Troll also joined the chase and herded him to the teachers, but the teachers were acting like they couldn't see the creatures as he ran right past screaming, "The werewolf and giant spider are going to eat me." The Nightmare King watched in satisfaction as he sent his nightmares to follow the boy for the next 2 weeks. He then turned his lead nightmare around and hurried to Era's side where the Sandman was waiting beside her. Pitch looked at Sandy as to why she hadn't been moved from the large clearing. Era then noticed him and stood when he noticed the rope around her ankle and growled. Ed as he quickly walked forward and knelt to look at the knot. He sighed as it was a really tight knot to undo and then drew his sword to cut through the rope. Era smiled at him as Pitch quickly cut the rope and found himself being hugged by a trembling child. Pitch gently picked her up and cuddled her close as he and the Sandman started on their way to the castle. Era sighed happily as she then drifted to sleep again in his arms. The next day, Era woke up in the hospital wing to a relieved Poppy as she quickly checked her over and told her Ronald had confessed to what he had done and was expelled as well as put into the mental ward. Meanwhile, Dumbledore was furious as Ronald had failed his part of the plan and was now placed into the mental ward. The corrupted old man then felt his bond with Fox break as the Phoenix then flashed out of the office. Dumbledore yelled in rage then quickly calmed down as he began to plan on how to get Harry Potter back under his thumb. Chapter 8. Malthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Fem. Harry. Timeline: starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Fem. Harry is the only one who can Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason. He has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Ch.8. June 21st. Pitch knew something was wrong with Era. He couldn't explain it, but she was scared and scared bad to the point she needed him. Era watched as Quirrell tried to get the stone. She had a gag in her mouth and her hands and feet were bound tight. She tried to wiggle her way out of the ropes when she noticed nightmare forming and new help had arrived. Pitch then came into view as he saw what had been done to Era. He growled low and quickly hurried to her side to undo the ropes as Era whimpered in pain from the ropes. Pitch just about had her free when Quirrell suddenly released the ropes and told her to stand in front of the mirror. She glanced sideways at Pitch as he nodded and walked with her to the mirror. He stood behind her as they gazed into the mirror and saw two completely different things. Pitch looked at the mirror in shock as it showed him before becoming the Nightmare King, with Ira or someone who looked like Era dressed in a white gown and was happily placing a wreath of flowers over his head. His heart ached at the sight as he knew that he had to remember the child somehow. That it was very important he remembered. Era looked into the mirror and saw an older version of her with all the guardians, Jack and Pitch surrounding her happily. Jack had an arm around her waist. As he softly kissed her, causing the real Era to blush as she realized what the mirror showed. She then whispered just loud enough for Pitch to hear, "I show not your face but your heart's desire." Just then they both saw the Pitch in each reflection show them a blood-red stone as the mirror Pitch slipped into the pocket of Era's look-alike. Era then felt the weight in her pocket as she was asked, and she said, "I see the family I have gained in the future. It's everything I ever wanted, and more." Quirrell growled and made to shove her out of the way when they heard a second voice say, "Let me speak to her, face to face." "You're not strong enough, Master." "I'm strong enough for this." Pitch and Era tensed as Quirrell unraveled his turban and then turned his back to them. Era A small cry of disgust as she saw the snake-like face sticking out the back of Quirrell's head as it looked at her and said, "Look at what I've become because of you, you stupid girl." Era then realized who the face was and whispered in shock, "Voldemort." Voldemort then had Quirrell walking backwards towards her as she took a step back in fear. Pitch then drew his sword as he quickly stood in front of his little one as they advanced on them. He swung his sword but it passed right through them without harm, causing Pitch to curse loudly as he told Era to run. Era did as he said and started to run as Voldemort yelled for Quirrell to kill her. Era dodged and swerved as Pitch tried desperately to stop the grown adult from attacking his little girl. He then watched as Quirrell grabbed Era then let go as he screamed, "My hands! Her skin burns my hands!" Voldemort growled and told him to just kill the girl when Era reached out in a panic and grabbed onto Quirrell's face with both hands. Era was in so much pain but didn't let go until she felt herself let go and Voldemort's spirit attacked her. Pitch felt his heart stop as she collapsed after the spirit attacked her. He hurried to her side and gently gathered her into his arms when he heard the sounds of footsteps. He gently hid in the shadows with her as Pitch gently held her in his arms when Snape came down and through the door. Pitch sighed in relief and stepped out as Snape looked around in a panic for Era. Snape then noticed Pitch and he asked what happened, causing Pitch to explain everything and that Era was not responding to his voice. 2 hours later, Pitch kept vigilance over Era as she lay in the hospital wing bed under the influence of a coma. Pitch smoothed the hair out of her face as he kissed her forehead and stepped back into the shadows as the sun rose. He continued watch over her at night as he realized that Era had something to do with his past before becoming the Nightmare King. He sighed as he wished that he could take her away from all she had to put up with through the year and even take her away from her relatives. He then saw the old man in charge of the school come in with a malicious look on his face as Dumbledore then said, "Well done, my pawn. By the time it comes to defeat Voldemort, you'll be ready to defeat him, then I'll kill you by claiming you have gone dark." Pitch led in anger as he realized the headmaster was supposedly training her to defeat the very human spirit that had attacked her. Pitch then said, "Not in my books, you foolish mortal." He watched as Era then woke up with a groan and said, "What the hell hit me?" Dumbledore then told her what and Pitch noticed her tense slightly at the sight of Dumbledore, but the old man didn't notice as he explained why he thought Quirrell couldn't touch her skin. Era was polite but she kept an eye on the headmaster the whole time. Pitch then growled as the headmaster stood and made to walk out the door when he said, "Your parents would be proud of the Gryffindor tendencies you showed." Era waited until he left to breathe a sigh of relief, then looked at Pitch as she asked, "What really happened?" Pitch smiled in relief as he sat next her and then pulled her into a hug as he whispered, "You had me very worried, little one. You were in a coma after that spirit attacked you." Era shivered and said softly, "I hope I never do that again." He felt like pure evil. Pitch sighed and kissed her forehead gently as he told that he had to go because the sun was rising. Era nodded in understanding and then asked before Pitch left, "Will you visit me at me relatives?" "I'll try, little ice mage, I'll try." Era smiled at him and waved gently as he disappeared into the shadows, then laid back down to try and sleep. She then entered her mindscape to talk with Jack, who was worried sick from what she could tell. She hurried to the Douglas fir in her snowy winter wonderland and found Jack waiting. He then hurried towards her and hugged her tight as he asked, "Are you okay?" "What happened?" Era explained what happened and Jack breathed a sigh of relief at hearing she was fine when something occurred to Era and said, "Oh God, I killed someone." She hit her knees in shock as Jack quickly knelt and told her, "You had no choice, Era. If you had to choose between him attacking you again and surviving, what would you do?" "I would choose to survive." "Then what you did was nothing but self-defense. You had no choice." Era looked at him with tears in her eyes as she said, "I still wish it hadn't turned out that way." Jack hugged her tight and said, "I know you do." He then told her to wake up and he would see her next winter unless she needed him desperately. Era smiled and nodded as she did something that Jack didn't expect. She gently kissed his cheek and said, "Thank you for being there for me all this time, Jack." Jack touched his cheek as she faded from the mindscape and then smiled as he thought to himself, "You're very welcomed, Era, very welcomed indeed." Era then woke up to Poppy checking her over and was asked, "How do you feel, Era?" "Much better than before. May I leave yet?" You may leave in an hour once I'm sure you are fine. I don't want you to suffer from a relapse. 1 hour later, Era was sitting with her house at their table for the leaving feast, and they soon finished as they then headed for the train. Era looked out the window as she tried not to laugh at the twins who were goofing off during Exploding Snap. She then sighed as she was glad to get away from Dumbledore but knew she was going back to the abuse and belittling of the Dursleys towards her. Either way, she just couldn't win sometimes. July 30th. Pitch sighed in relief as he finally was able to take a few days off and decided to go see Era, who he felt could use a friend at the moment. Meanwhile, Jack grinned as he used the Muggle money Era had gotten for him to buy her birthday gift, which was a poster and chibi plushie of her favorite ice user in Bleach along with some of the manga. The man never noticed the missing poster, plushie and manga since Jack had used a bottomless bag to put it in before paying. Jack smirked as he then wrapped the present up and then called for his new companion, which was an ice phoenix that bonded with him. Snowfire Ice flashed to his new master and gently took the package to Era, who had been locked in her room for the night. The next day, Era sighed as the Dursleys went over the plans for the dinner party that night, and then Vernon turned to her and said, I am not going to stand having your freakishness in my house to mess this up. You are to leave and not come back until 2 days have passed, understand? If you do come back early, you'll get the beating of a lifetime. Era nodded and said, Yes, Uncle Vernon. He then told her to finish her toast and to get out of the house. Era nodded and quickly did as he said, then she headed to the park. She wandered into the woods and sighed happily as she knew Hedwig was safe with Hermione. Her thoughts then turned to the magic journals called mini messengers that the twins had bought for their group to stay in touch easier over the summer. She smiled as she patted the comforting weight of it in her pocket and then headed to her pond. She smiled at seeing the familiar water and grinned as she took her shoes off, rolled up her pants to dangle her feet in the water. She spent the day relaxing in her favorite spot and then noticed night falling. She sighed and prayed that she could see one of her two favorite immortals at least for her birthday. She then heard the neigh of a nightmare and grinned as she realized she may have gotten her wish. She looked towards the sound and found Pitch riding towards her with a smile on his face. Era ran over to greet him happily as he dismounted. He managed to brace himself just in time as Era slammed into him happily to give him a hug. He chuckled and returned the hug as he asked what she was doing at the pond instead of at home. Era got a sour look on her face and told him what the Dursleys had done and that her relatives didn't even remember that it was her birthday today. Pitch went wide-eyed at that bit of news and then smiled as he thought of something that would make her birthday special if he could just pull it off without being attacked by the other immortals. Chapter 9. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Fem. Harry. Timeline: starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Fem. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover, her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Ch.9. Era waited with the nightmare while Pitch went to talk to the Sandman about something. She then gently tapped the horse's shoulder and said, "Tag. You're it." Meanwhile, Sandy looked surprised to see Pitch as he knew Pitch usually took July 30th, 31 and August 1st off from his duties. He a question mark appear over top his head and Pitch grinned in a friendly manner as he whispered into Sandy's ear about what he had found out and what he wanted to do for Era. Sandy grinned evilly at the idea and nodded as he made the motion of writing something to Pitch, who understood. Pitch then wrote a letter to each guardian, calling a truce for the night and invited them to come celebrate Era's birthday in her secret place. He then added that Era had no idea of his little plan and that he hoped they would be able to make it. Sandy then took the letters and saluted his old friend as He then created a plane to fly the letters to the others. Pitch soon arrived in the clearing to find his lead Nightmare and Era playing tag around the clearing. Pitch chuckled as he watched them play happily among the trees when he heard Toothina's voice behind him along with North's and Bunnymun's. Sandy and the others' jaw dropped at seeing the Nightmare playing with the young child. Then Bunny M. Said, "Well, I'll be, the Shelly is a natural with animals, it looks like." Pitch snorted and said, "She has the whole herd under her spell, they think of her as a filly." Pitch then smirked as Era finally noticed him and the others. Her eyes went wide at seeing the other guardians she hadn't met yet as Pitch chuckled and said, "Flies, child." Era picked her jaw up off the ground and grinned as she ran over while laughing. She hugged Pitch and said, "Is this what you left to do? Well, you did mention it was your 12th birthday." Her eyes went wide and he hugged her back as she then began to cry happily and said, "Thank you so much." North then laughed as he said, "Perhaps a ride in sleigh is needed." Era squealed happily while Pitch laughed as North scooped her up onto his shoulder and headed for the sleigh with everyone. Pitch snickered as Bunnymund was placed in the sled before he could get away, and North then grinned evilly as he had Era sitting next to him and then gave the command to the reindeer to go. Era whooped in joy as Pitch rode beside them on his Nightmare and then looked surprised as North handed her the reins and told her it was her turn to drive the sled. Pitch started laughing at Bunnymund's face as Era gently took the reins, and then North actually had to sit back as Era started doing a better job of freaking out Bunnymund than him on a good day. Pitch Astley kept up his tooth screamed in joy, and Sandy had his arms up in the classic roller coaster ride pose. North then took the reins back and landed as Bunnymund leapt out and started to kiss the ground to everyone's amusement. Era then smirked and said, "Ah, did we go too fast for the bunny rabbit?" Even Sandy was laughing at that as Pitch hid his amusement poorly. Bunnymund then just said, "You, Shelly, are insane. That was the scariest ride of my life." Era looked at Pitch, who was trying to hide his sniggers. Then she started giggling as Pitch looked over at Sandy, causing both of them to burst out laughing. Bunnymund was blushing as the rest of the group followed the others into laughter. Era then got her laughter out of control and hugged the rabbit as she apologized for scaring him. Bunnymund sighed in amusement as North then said, "Well, you certainly drive better than me, haven't had that much fun in a while." Era grinned as they then headed back to the clearing and they talked into the rest of the night. They all noticed her getting sleepy, but she surprised them by curling up and laying her head on the Nightmare, who nuzzled the child happily. Sandy smiled softly as Pitch sighed and made sure she was asleep. North, Toothina and Bunnymund watch in shock as Pitch gently smoothed the child's hair back. Pitch then told them that her relatives had kicked her out of the house for the next 2 days. The guardians growled at that when Pitch noticed the sun was starting to rise and excused himself to return home. Sandy watched Pitch closely as Pitch looked at Era with a small smile, then left through the shadows. North then noticed the shimmer of human magic on Era, and it wasn't the good kind either. North mentioned it to the others and Sandy blinked in shock as Toothy Na said, "Why would someone put such harmful magic on a child?" North then said, "I don't know, but I don't like the look of spell." Sandy sighed as Toothina and Bunnymund agreed with him. They then discussed how to remove the spell if possible. Bunnymund offered to stay with her for the day until they could ask Mim's advice on the spell that Era had on her. The next day, Era sighed as she looked at the giant rabbit that was keeping her company. She then smiled as she peeked at the egg he had created, which was a pretty emerald green with little silver flowers placed on it. Bunnymund grinned and then passed her the egg. She gave him such a bright smile and a tight hug to his surprise as she whispered, "Thank you." Just then they heard a loud crack come from behind them, causing both of them to jump and look around as they then heard a voice say, "Miss Era Potter. It's such an honor." They both looked down to find what Era identified as a house elf from Draco's descriptions. She smiled and knelt as she asked, "What are you doing here, Mr. Elf?" Dobby came to warn Miss Era on the orders of Master's son. Miss Era must be very careful or not go to Hogwarts for her own safety. What? Why? A terrible plot is being put in place. Miss Era must promise not to go back until danger has passed. I'm afraid I have no choice but to go, Dobby. Dumbledore will force me there anyways. Dobby sighed and then said, at least Dobby try. Era then thanked him, causing the house elf to start crying about how wonderful she was to Bunnymun's amusement. Era just stood there in embarrassment as the elf continued his little rant before realizing the time and disappeared. Bunnymun chuckled as North and Toothina showed up with Sandy just as the sun went down and Mim came up. North looked at the Mim and asked how they removed the dark spell on Era. Mim then shone a simple beam on her to show the chains that made the magic, and one part shone more than the rest as North understood what to do. He gently cut that part with a swift stroke of his sword as Era began to breathe more freely as the spell disappeared. She thanked them and then sighed sadly. Toothina then asked what was Wr. Ong, and Era said, the person who placed the spell on me doesn't want me to leave my so-called aunts, meaning to convince him the spell is still on me. I have to stay at my aunt's for now. Toothina, Bunnymund and North made to protest, but she told them about Dumbledore and what he had done when she had gotten free the first time. Bunnymund then said, I don't like the sound of Voldemort or Dumbledore, but at the moment we can't interfere, can we? Just then Pitch arrived to see Era, who noticed him and ran over to hug him. She giggled as he patted her head when Snowfire then appeared. She grinned at seeing the present in the Ice Phoenix's talons and said, Snowfire, is that from Jack? The Phoenix sang a few happy notes as he nodded and dropped the gift into her hands, then disappeared in a flash of slushy ice. Era giggled as Bunnymund, North and Toothina asked what she got. She quickly opened the present and gasped happily at the plushie of Hitsugaya. Toshiro then noticed the shrunken down poster that made her smile. She started laughing when she pulled out the manga and grinned as she said, he got me the new releases of the Bleach manga. North looked confused, as did Toothina. Bunnymund then started hopping like a little kid and said, he got you the Quincy invasion arc. Era nodded as Bunnymund asked, do you think once you're done them, I can read them? Era just started laughing as she said, never would have pegged you for a manga addict like me. Pitch chuckled as Bunnymund just coughed and said, I just like the storyline. Era smirked and then said playfully, you keep telling yourself that. Pitch chuckled as Bunnymund laughed and said, you're all right, kid. Era just gave a little bow when Pitch noticed the dark spell on Era was gone. He smiled as North then offered to bring her to the workshop, and Era declined as she said, I kinda want to spend time with Pitch, and maybe Sandy. Sandy and Pitch looked surprised, but Pitch then smiled as he felt his heart warm at the thought she wanted to spend time with him. Sandy smiled also as he then realized why he had felt like he had met Era before. It was because he had, when she had been a newborn being, showed off to her 4 godfathers by her father. Toothina, North and Bunnymund smiled and nodded as they told her that they had to go for now, but she was more than welcome to visit during the summer when she didn't have school. Her eyes went wide at that as she thanked them happily. Pitch nodded to North and the others as they left, but Sandy stayed behind to Era's delight. 2 hours later, Pitch laughed as Sandy did his job with Era sitting on his little platform to watch the show. Pitch then looked at Era as he knew she needed a protector from Dumbledore inside. Sandy looked over at him and made a question mark appear as he could see that Pitch was lost in thought while they landed back in the clearing. Pitch gave him a look that said, later, as Era yawned sleepily and Pitch held her in his arms as he sat down against a tree trunk. Era got comfy as she sighed happily and cuddled into Pitch's warmth. She was soon asleep, causing Sandy to look at him and make the question mark again. Pitch sighed and said, I want to make her a protector from my black sand and her magic, but my sand is a little unstable when paired with human magic. Sandy then thought about that, then snapped his fingers as he created 2 handfuls of dream sand and motioned for Pitch to do the same. Pitch blinked as Sandy then gently took the black sand and mixed it with the dream sand without one or the other taking each other over. Pitch watched as Sandy shaped a strong, fast-looking stallion from the mixed sand, with its body being a dark gold and its mane, tail, socks, blaze and hooves were a deep nightmare black. Pitch then understood and smiled at his former friend as he gently woke Era, who opened her eyes and stared at the stallion as she felt drawn to it. Pitch then told her to channel her magic into the still form of the horse. Era did as he said and poured her magic into the horse as it then began to twitch and move. Era was exhausted by the time the horse was fully alive, but she could feel the bond between her and the animal. Pitch then explained that the horse was hers and that it was made from black dream sand and gold dream sand. Era squealed happily as she hugged the stallion that nuzzled her happily. Sandy watched her happily as the stallion then offered his back to her and she climbed on. Pitch then got on his nightmare as Sandy created his own horse and they all looked at each other with Era smiling happily. Pitch then asked as they started to trot through the forest, "What will you call your new friend, Era?" Era thought about it and smiled as she said, "I kinda like Dream Wind." Pitch laughed as her horse neighed happily at the name and even Sandy looked amused. Era then whooped as she urged Dream Wind into a gallop and yelled, "Catch me if you can." Pitch and Sandy grinned and took off after her as they raced through the trees until the sun came up. August 8th. Era sighed as she sat in her room with Dream Wind in his shrunken form on her shoulder. The Dursleys were out of the house at the moment and they had placed bars on her window plus locks on her door. She was glad that she had Hedwig staying with Hermione for the summer. She lay down in her lumpy bed when she heard a tapping at her window. She stood and opened the curtains to find. Chapter 10. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Femme. Harry T. Melline. Starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Femme. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Femme. Harry. Amalthea. Femme. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. A.N. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Ch.10. Era Sta. Read in shock at the flying car outside her window with the twins at the wheel. She then grinned as she managed to open the window and said, "Why'd I believe your mother is going to kill you guys for driving the car?" Fred and George blushed but asked where her trunk and that was in her room. Era told them that the Dursleys had locked all her school stuff in the cupboard under the stairs. Fred and George then looked at each other and then her as Fred tossed her a rope. She quickly understood and tied the rope to the bars. Fred and George then proceeded to pull the bars out. Era smiled as the twins then picked the lock on her door, then they grabbed her trunk for her and loaded it into the car. Fred then remarked, "So what's with the miniature horse on your shoulder?" Era blinked then grinned and said, "His name is Dream Wind. He was given to me by some very special people to help protect me." The twins looked at the miniature horse as they asked, "So does he have any special abilities?" Dream Wind then jumped to the floor and returned to his true size to the twins' amazement. Era then hopped onto his back as the twins blinked and got back into the car. Dream Wind then watched as the CAR started to pull away, then leapt out the window as he began to gallop in midair to catch up to the car. Era whooped as they pulled up alongside the car. To the twins' amusement, they flew for the better part of the night until they saw the sun starting to rise. They soon landed at the coolest home Era had ever seen. When she saw a red-headed woman marching towards them, she gave the twins a HEADS up as Molly Weasley made it over to them and began to chew the twins out for making her worry. She then told them that their punishment was to degnome the garden while she got breakfast ready. She then turned to Era and smiled as she said, "Why don't you stable your horse in the barn out back, my dear? I can then get you something to eat while they degnome the garden." Era smiled and then ked her as Molly led the way to the barn and helped her Dream Wind comfortable. Molly then sadly smiled at her and said, "I'm very sorry for what Ronald had done to you. I just don't know where I went wrong with him." Era just smiled and said, "You did your best, Mrs. Weasley, so please don't blame yourself. Era then realized something and asked, Mrs. Weasley, how are you able to see Dream Wind? Ollie blinked then smiled as she shrugged and said, I'm not sure, Era, but I can see him plain as day. Era then smiled as she had a theory on why her stallion could be seen but kept it to herself as she followed Molly into the house. She then offered to help cook, causing Molly to look surprised. Molly then smiled and declined her help as she told Era she was a guest and that meant she didn't have to help cook and clean. Era looked surprised but then smiled as she asked if she could go into the garden to help the twins because she had never seen a gnome before. Molly smiled and nodded as she gave her directions to the garden, then told her that breakfast would be done in about half an hour. Era thanked her then made a small request for chocolate chip pancakes if that was okay with Molly. Ollie laughed and nodded as Era thanked her then headed out into the garden to help. She easily followed the chattering of the twins to where they were catching the gnomes. Era had to hide a giggle the potato-like creatures that were being spun around and around then tossed over the fence. She briefly wondered if that hurt them and asked Fred, who then told her, nah, they're tougher than they look, but you have to get them nice and dizzy so they can't find their way back to the gnome hole. Plus it helps that they're not very bright, so as soon as they know degnoming is going on, they come up to watch, making it easy to catch them. Era grinned and then said, what if they are smarter than they look? They could just like being spun and thrown because it's fun to them. Fred and George blinked and then looked at the gnomes in their hands who were hanging upside down. George then said, that makes way more sense than what I thought it would. Era then started giggling at the dumbstruck looks as Fred and George realized she could be right. They then shrugged and continued degnoming the garden as Era asked if she could help. Fred and George nodded as they helped her catch her first gnome, then told her that they had different targets that were worth different points in the field. Era then asked what one was worth the most points and Fred pointed out a scarecrow that was a good 15 meters away as he said, that is worth 200 points. Era then said, I will bet a box of chocolate frogs that I can hit that target on the first try. Fred and George looked at her then at each other as they said, we'll take that bet. Era grinned then started to spin in a circle really fast before letting go of the gnome straight at the target. The twins' jaw dropped as she hit the target with a loud thud and then looked at her as she grinned and said, that will be one box each, please. Fred then asked, how did you do that? Era grinned and said, by applying simple muggle science to the game. Fred and George looked at her in surprise and then grinned in amusement. Fred and George then looked at each other and said, Forge, we just got outsmarted, didn't we? I do believe you're right, Gred. Era laughed as they then heard Molly calling them for breakfast. She then tapped Fred's shoulder and said, Tag. You're it. Fred looked shocked as George got the idea and took off running after Era. Fred then realized what happened and quickly took off after them while laughing. 2 days later, Molly took her brood and Era to Diagon Alley to meet with Hermione, Neville and Draco so they could do their school supplies shopping. Era smiled as she saw her best male and female friend waiting for her when Molly took them to the bookshop where there was a book signing going on. Molly then noticed the name of the author and gave an excited sigh as she patted at her hair. Era then noticed who it was and groaned softly along with Hermione at the apparent fraud. Lockhart then looked up as Era was given an elbow to the ribs by a reporter. He was up in a flash and was about to grab her when she managed to dodge and said, Don't touch me. I don't know you, nor do I want to be used to boost your fame. The man laughed then said, I have an announcement to make now that Miss Potter is here. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, I'm going to Hogwarts this year as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Oh heck no, said Era in absolute horror. And as an added bonus, I am providing free books to Ms. Potter and her group of best friends. An evil gleam came to her eyes. All of my best friends? She asked. Of course. Quote, her smirk would have made people run far, far away if she was around people who knew that smirk. It was highly reminiscent of Jack when he was about to do something very painful and humiliating. In that case, everyone, front and center. With that, the Weasley brood, Draco, Neville, Hermione who happened to be in the area showed up. Era took great pleas. You were in naming each of them and the man's grin diminished with each name. There were 8 students there, and he had just offered to buy all of their defense books for the year. Era had just outsmart ed him and cost him a pretty penny easily. Lockhart was furious for falling into that trap and vowed to take revenge on her. He also knew he had to have her for how pretty she was. He began to plot as Era and her friends left the store while Draco's father and Arthur Weasley got into a fight over something stupid. The summer passed quickly as Era enjoyed staying with the Weasleys, but she missed being able to chat with Sandy and Pitch at night. Era sighed as she sat on the window seat again as she was unable to sleep. She then snuck out of the room quietly and headed downstairs and out to the barn. Dreamwind was in his stall pacing when she came over to the door and gently called his name. The large dream stallion whickered happily and nuzzled her pocket for the sugar cubes he knew she had. Era chuckled happily as she fed him his treat and stroked his nose when she heard Molly's voice say, "I thought I heard you come out here." Era looked embarrassed to have been caught when Molly then smiled and said, "Can't sleep again." Quote, Era shook her head and Molly smiled as she walked over and said, "Why don't you two go for a ride? We have quite a few acres of land and all I ask is no flying for right now. It could help you sleep once you get back." Era smiled brightly and quickly hugged Molly as she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley." The next day, September 1st. Era giggled as Molly looked at her in shocked amazement for actually waking the twins, Percy and Ginny, up early and getting them fully packed up for the ride to the train station. She then went into the kitchen and nearly had a heart attack to seeing her kitchen so clean with 2 plates of food for her and Arthur on the table. Era then asked if something was wrong and Molly shook her head as she hugged Era and said, "You really didn't have to do this." Era blushed and scuffed a toe on the floor as she said, "I just wanted to show my gratitude for opening you home up to me for the rest of summer vacation." Molly smiled and said thank you to her when Arthur came in and stopped short at seeing the kitchen and the food. Molly and Arthur then quickly ate and got dressed as Era gathered everyone by the door with our trunks so that they could all help carry their trunks to the car. They were soon on their way as Dreamwind slept in his mistress's lap in his smallest form. They then pulled into the station in half an hour early and quickly headed to platform 9 3/4. The Weasley clan then all loaded themselves onto the train with Era, who yawned and stood as she told the twins that she was going to take a walk through the compartments. Era smiled happily as she walked through the compartments when she found a first year that had silvery blonde hair and silvery blue eyes, being picked on by some other first years. Era then marched over and said, "Oi, leave her alone." Luna looked at Era with a little bit of shock, then gave a dreamy smile as the bullies left. She then said, "So you're the one Mim had sent Jack Frost to?" Era looked at her in shock, then noticed the girl looked very familiar somehow. She tried to remember when she then realized gave off the same vibe of wonder as North. Era grinned and then asked, "So how is your grandpa North?" Luna looked shocked and then smiled shyly as she said, "He's doing well. Were you the child he saw during the summer with Bunnymunt?" Era grinned as she nodded and Luna smiled. Era then invited her to come and sit with her circle of friends. Luna accepted and followed the older girl back to the compartment where Hermione, Draco and Neville had joined the group while she was gone. Era then introduced Luna to the people that she didn't know as they sat down. Luna quickly found her niche with Ginny as the little sisters of the group, and she was listening as Era told them about what happened on her birthday. Luna smiled as she knew the others knew Era wasn't lying about meeting her great-grandfather and the other guardians. Hermione then grinned as she asked, "So the Bogeyman was the one to get them to come?" Era nodded and said, "Pitch really hates being called the Bogeyman though." They then talked about how each of their summers went and discussed their summer homework. They never realized they were almost to the school until the intercom came on and warned the students to get their uniforms on as they would be arriving at Hogwarts in about 2 hours. It then turned into a scramble to get uniforms on as Era said, "Here we go again." 2 hours later, the train easily pulled into the station and Era and her friends grabbed a warm car while Ginny and Luna rode in the boats. They soon arrived at the castle and Era's friends hurried into the castle while Era told Dreamwind to stay in the forest for now. The stallion nodded and then trotted off towards the forest. Era then turned and went into the school for the feast. The next few weeks had Era very stressed out in Dada since Lockhart wouldn't leave her alone when it came to his demonstrations. The man always picked her to do the creature and would force her to do it. She finally had enough on the day before Halloween and yelled at the man to leave her alone. Lockhart then told her she had detention with him for disrespecting a teacher so rudely. Era made to argue that sticking up for her was not being disrespectful to a teacher, but the man threatened to make it 2 nights of detention. Era was near ready to cry at the unfair treatment and sighed as she sat back down. Halloween Eve. Era and Lockhart had been answering his fan mail when she felt her body go stiff, and Lockhart stood with an evil grin. He walked over and grabbed her arm far too hard, causing very painful bruises that formed almost instantly. He then said something that sent chills down her spine. "You're certainly the prettiest child I have ever had my eye on in a long time. I believe I'm going to enjoy this after you made a fool out of me." The man then roughly grabbed her chest, causing pain as Era tried to scream but couldn't. The pedophile then started to go lower, to her horror, when a knock sounded on the door and Lockhart told them that they would just be a moment. He then whispered into her ear that if she told anyone he would kill her. Era was frightened as she could tell he wasn't kidding when he unfroze her, then opened the door to reveal Snape standing there. Later that night, Pitch quietly slipped into Era's room where he found her crying her eyes out and walked over quietly as he touched her arm, causing her to yelp in pain. Pitch then gently grabbed her arm as he rolled up the sleeve and found the bruises. He softly asked who had grabbed her that hard, and Era threw herself at him as she poured out the whole story and what he had threatened with to keep her from telling another teacher. Pitch listened in stone-cold fury, as he may give children nightmares but he would never physically hurt a child, or if they were abuse victims, make them dream about it. Even he had his morals when it came to children. Pitch gently held Era until she fell asleep from crying her sorrow and fear out. He left his lead nightmare there to guard her and then went to find Lockhart so he could see just what else the man was hiding. He found the man dreaming without a care. Pitch then gave him enough nightmares to give the man a sleepless night, as Pitch was determined to make the man suffer for harming his little one. The next day, Gilderoy Lockhart looked like hell rolled over him when he stumbled into the morning staff meeting, causing everyone to ask, "What in the world happened to you?" Nightmares all night long. Meanwhile, Jack rushed to Hogwarts in his excitement to see Era. She was waiting outside for him with her second familiar as he landed and gave her a hug. Era smiled up at him as she now felt complete with him near. Jack felt the magic of the castle then greet him, and he felt a change in the air as he was suddenly much more comfortable. He smiled and then asked, "Should it be a snow day tomorrow?" Era laughed and nodded as Jack tapped his staff on the ground. Thick fluffy white snow soon covered the ground as they headed inside while Dreamwind went back to the forest. Era smiled and told Jack, though their bond, "I missed you, Jack." Chapter 11. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Fem. Harry T. Timeline starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Fem. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter, or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it may ns a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Ch.11. December. R came quickly to Hogwarts as Era and Jack spent most of their time together despite the attacks that had been happening. Since Halloween night, for some reason, all the students except for her close Saint friends thought that Era was behind the attacks. She knew that Dumbledore and Lockhart had to be spreading the rumors about her, but at this point she couldn't prove it. She sighed as she headed OU. T sighed to meet with Jack and raced through the snow to their clearing near the lake. She saw him doing his usual trick, flying, causing her to smile, and she then picked up a snowball, aimed and fired as the snowball hit Jack in the side of the head. Jack stopped and looked down at Era, who had one heck of a smirk on her face. He grinned and quickly swooped at her as she hit the ground. She then stood up and fired another snowball at his face that hit, causing ice war one between them. Jack was laughing as Era used a little trick she had learned from Naruto to surround him, causing a look of fear on his face. She threw snowball after snowball while Jack did his best to dodge. He was smacked in the back of his head quite a few times when he finally called out, "Okay, you win, Era. Now can you let me out?" Era made a show of thinking about before hitting him with one last snowball as the ice mirrors disappeared. Jack laughed and gently ruffled her hair as he said, "You're getting better with that technique. Have you been practicing the other one?" Era nodded happily as they headed back up to the castle, unaware that Era was being watched by Lockhart. Jack was flying ahead when he noticed suddenly that Era wasn't with him. Meanwhile, Era trembled as Lockhart threatened her again after he came up behind her and grabbed her. He then quickly disappeared as some of the children walked by, causing Era to fall to the ground. Trembling and shaking, Jack came up behind her and scared her as she jerked away and whipped around, wide-eyed and terrified. She realized it was Jack and she tackled him in a hug while she shook in fear, and Jack tried comforting her despite him not knowing what happened to her. Jack softly asked what had her so scared, and she softly whispered that she was unable to tell him at this point. Alarm bells went off in Jack's head at that, and he quickly hugged her as he told her that she didn't have to tell him if she didn't want to. Era sighed in relief and they then headed back up to the castle for her to warm up a little. Jack smiled as she beamed up at him and tried to get him to slip up to her what he got for a Christmas present. He just laughed and told her that he wasn't going to tell anything about her gift except that she would love it. Meanwhile, Dreamwind was worried about his mistress. The faker had threatened her again, and Dreamwind could do nothing to help her inside the castle because the old manipulator had placed a ward around the castle that prevented him from entering. He then heard a neigh from behind him and turned to see the lead nightmare, aka his mother, behind him. She walked over and said, "Son, what's the matter? Why aren't you with Master's little one?" Quote. Dreamwind snorted and told her what the old manipulator had done to keep him from his mistress and what the faker had done to her while she was outside. The lead nightmare was furious and said, "Master will not be happy about this." Meanwhile, Era yawned as she headed into her dorm room with Jack and plopped on the bed. She grabbed one of her manga on the bookshelf beside her and began to lose herself in the world of the book while Jack lay at her feet in wolf form. It was 2 hours later that Snape came up to tell her supper was about to start and found her asleep with Jack dozing at the end of the bed. He quietly walked over to the bed as Jack raised his head, and Jack watched him as he removed the book from her hand. Snape then placed the book on her bedside table with a bookmark in it. He then gently covered her up and then asked Jack to follow him. Jack looked at his sleeping friend, then gently slipped off the bed, turned back to human form. He then followed Snape to the man's office where Snape closed the door and said, "I believe we might have a problem." Jack then said, "You've noticed it too then?" Snape nodded and said, "Whoever harmed and threatened her has certainly kept his activities low-key and almost undetectable since her first scare." Jack narrowed his eyes and said, "I think whoever threatened her the first time did it again today when I accidentally got ahead of her. She was scared and trembling when I found her after doubling back but refused to tell me anything." Snape swore softly as Jack filed the curse away for later and then asked, "So who do you suspect that did something to Era?" "Lockhart. He has been harassing her in class by making her act out his stupid stories in front of the other kids. She also had to serve a detention with him that I had to interrupt because it was getting a little too close to curfew." Jack growled softly at what Snape was possibly implying when Snape said, "Jack, you can't do anything to him without Era being blamed for it. He knows she is an ice mage, thus anything you do would possibly be blamed on her." Jack cursed softly at that and then sighed as he knew the professor was right. He then asked, "What are we going to do about this?" Snape sighed and said, "Wait until he slips up or until we can get some proof or dirt on him." Later that night, Pitch snarled at the man who was trying to harm and threaten his little one and then called upon his nastiest nightmares as he told the Not to hold back on the man and that they were to make him believe in him the best they could. The nightmares whickered in agreement and then got to work. Pitch watched in satisfaction for a few minutes before going to see Era, who looked exhausted as she slept. Pitch sat beside her and gently stroked her hair, causing Era to sigh and snuggle closer to him as she said, "Daddy." Pitch smiled sadly. As he realized he had to leave soon to continue his rounds as the Nightmare King, he leaned down and gently kissed Era's forehead as he whispered, "Sleep tight, little one, sweet dreams." Pitch then slipped out of the room seconds before Jack came in with a tired look on his face. He transformed into his wolf form and hopped up on the foot of the bed to sleep. 2 days before Christmas, Jack was called away by Mim to go on a worldwide snow run, so Era was avoiding the headmaster and Lockhart by hiding in the kitchen, where she asked the house elves if she could bake some holiday treats for her friends. The elves were all for it and even set up a workstation for her. She smiled and thanked them, then set to work baking cookies and other goodies. About an hour later, Snape poked his head into the room and hid a smile as she continued to bake without noticing him. He then walked away to tell McGonagall where she was just in case. 2 hours later, Pitch followed his nightmare to Era and found her elbow deep in cookie dough. He quietly walked over to her just as she turned with the flour in her hands. She yelped as she accidentally tossed the flour in the air and the open bag did a somersault, dumping the flour on Pitch, and the bag landed on his head. Era stared in shock as Pitch removed the bag and coughed out a cloud of flour. Era then started giggling like mad as she got a good look at him. Pitch saw himself in the mirror-like reflection of the pots and also started laughing as he had to admit he looked like a ghost with the flour covering him. He then hugged Era and said, "After the night I had last night, a good laugh is what I needed." Era beamed at him as he then smiled sadly and said, "I won't be able to visit Christmas Day, so I thought I would bring your gift to you early." Era's eyes lit up as he handed her a black box with a white bow. She looked up at Pitch, who nodded with a smile, causing her to cheer and open the box. She gently took out a black and gold locket on a black chain and then looked at Pitch with wonder in her eyes. Pitch smiled and said, "This locket I've had for a while. I don't remember where I got it, but I had a feeling that you would like it." The next thing he knew, Era had tackled him in a hug and whispered, "I love it." Pitch laughed and told her that there was one more gift in the box, so Era picked it up and found a nightmare place USHIE with a golden ribbon tied in a bow around its neck. She squealed happily and hugged it to Pitch's amusement as she chanted, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Her and Pitch then started making cookies and all that together before he had to go. Needless to say, Pitch showed her some new tricks that he had learned in his years of cooking for himself. Pretty soon he had to go, but not before doing her new locket up around her neck and giving her a hug. She then put a bag of cookies in his hand and told him Merry Christmas as he smiled, then left. Christmas Eve, North grinned as he saved his granddaughter for last since she was at Hogwarts. He quickly gave the other children their presents before making his way to where he sensed his granddaughter. He found her with Hermione, Draco, the twins, Neville and Era in the Slytherin Common, where they were laughing while playing the board game called Tongue Twister and drinking warm apple cider. He grinned and then said, "What is this I see? Luna is playing a game." All heads turned towards him and eyes went wide as Luna grinned and said dreamily, "Hi Grandpa." Chapter 12. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise O. F the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule: don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing: Jack Frost and Fem. Harry. Timeline: starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Fem. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as F. Friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Fem. Harry. Amalthea. Fem. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter, or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. A.N. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, That is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it. It means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. Hey guys, go check out Mrs. Kitsune's fanfic called The Path of a Snowflake. She did a great job on the first chapter. I expect great things for her fanfic. Ch.12. North laughed as the Their children in the room looked at him and then grinned as Era waved. She then asked if he wanted some apple cider and if he wanted to join in on the game. North declined to join the game but accepted a large mug of apple cider as he visited with them for the next 3 hours. He then gave Luna a hug and said goodbye as he had to get back to the North Pole. They all waved as North disappeared and then yawned as they went to sleep. The next day, Luna and the others opened their gifts from North and their family members to their delight when Luna noticed the locket around Era's neck. Luna asked to see it and was handed the locket gently when she suddenly went stiff. Era looked worried as Luna said, "The darkness will lose the memories of someone beloved and seek to extinguish the lights of memories, hope, dreams and wonder in an attempt to be believed in by all. Only his lost child, the hound, wolf and light of fun can stop him and return him to normal." Era looked worried as she said, "I don't like the sound of that. That sounds like a prophecy." Luna quickly handed the necklace back and said, "You have a tough road ahead of you, but it will be fine as long as Jack Frost is at your side." Era nodded as she pushed the warning to the back of her mind, and then they rejoined the festivities with their other friends. Few months later, near the end of the year, Era ran to Snape with the piece of paper Hermione had in her hand when she had been petrified and told him everything. Snape swore violently then sighed as he said, "Let's get this over and done with." Era nodded and led the way to the bathroom where she believed the entrance was hidden. They were soon aware of someone following them as Era opened the door and disappeared inside with Snape. They both turned and faced the door to find Lockhart with his own wand out and a cruel smirk on his face. Snape noticed the way Era slightly stiffened and growled as he disarmed the man rather hard and grabbed the man's wand, then snapped it. He then told Era to open the way to the chamber now that they had their bait. Lockhart didn't even have time to scream as he was thrown down the chute and was soon followed by Snape and Era. Lockhart was lying dazed on the ground as Snape hit the floor with a loud crunch and looked down to find the floor littered with bones of small animals. Era landed with a smaller Cr. Unchan quickly looked around as she stayed close to Snape. Lockhart was then hoisted to his feet at one point and told the idiot to start walking. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Lockhart made to turn a corner and asked, "How big did you say the creature was?" Pitch arrived in time to hear his little one say, "We don't know." Era then noticed him and smiled when she suddenly heard a scuffle and turned to find Lockhart approaching her with Snape's wand. Snape was on the ground with a black eye and was getting up as Lockhart gave his spiel. He then raised the wand as Era was backing up past the snake's skin and began to say the memory charm. Pitch and Snape tackled the man at the same time, causing him to misfire the spell on the ceiling, and then it hit Pitch without anyone noticing. The Nightmare King fell unconscious as the ceiling caved in and separated Era from the others. Snape yelled at her to be careful through the rock and she told him that she would fight with the snake and Riddle Goes Cannon. Era was exhausted as her and Ginny made their way back to where the cave-in happened. Snape had gotten most of the rock shifted to make a small hole for them to crawl through, and Era quickly looked for Pitch but he was nowhere in sight. Era looked worried but didn't ask where Pitch went as they hurried to the entrance where Snape sent a message to McGonagall. While Snowfire, who had appeared with the Sorting Hat during the fight, disappeared to put the hat back without Dumbledore knowing. They soon had brooms tossed down to them and they were taken to Headmaster where he talked to them about what happened. Lockhart was soon arrested for fraud and sexual harassment and threatening of a minor. Snape watched the man go with a smirk, then told Dumbledore that he would take Era to the infirmary to make sure that she wouldn't get sick. Dumbledore nodded and dismissed them as Snape quickly took her out of the room and to the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey quickly gave both of them a cure-all potion just in case, then examined them for injuries. Era smiled with relief as Jack came back from his run on the other side of the world and he quickly came to her side. 2 weeks after Era goes home, Vernon smirked as he looked at the freak and told her to start on all her chores before Marge and Ripper arrived, causing Era to nod and start. She barely aged to finish before the walrus's sister arrived with her dog. She stayed long enough to greet Marge and Ripper, then cook supper before asking to go out for the night. Petunia sniffed and told her to get out as Aira nodded and hurried out the door. Aira smiled as she headed for her pond and found Dreamwind waiting happily for her. She got on his back and said, "What do you think about escaping Arrow? Und Easter break from England with Jack for a bit." Dreamwind neighed happily and nuzzled his mistress's leg before trotting deeper into the woods. She sighed happily as she came to a small campsite. He had set up with some old sheets her aunt didn't want and a small portable grill she managed to get to work with magic. She then heard a noise from some nearby bushes a few minutes later while cooking some rabbits she had caught. She looked and was surprised to see a large black hound come out with its nose twitching. She grinned and offered to share with the dog as he slowly approached. The dog wagged his tail and sat next to her as she smiled and gave him part of one of the cooked rabbits. Meanwhile, the lead nightmare was standing in the trees as she watched over her master's little one. Shush. He smiled at the child who was crawling into her makeshift tent and then watched as the strange dog who smelled more like a human crawled in beside her and curled up at her side protectively. The next night, Aira giggled as she noticed the dream sand starting to fly around and raced to where Sandy usually did his work. Sandy heard her calling him as he turned and looked at Aira, who was on the ground. He smiled in amusement as he lifted her up to the edge of his platform and was given a hug. Sandy then blinked in shock as Aira asked, "Sandy, have you seen Pitch lately? He hasn't come to visit ye. And he said he would come before or on my birthday. I'm starting to get worried." Sandy shook his head and then patted hers as he decided to have a little bit of fun. Aira squeaked in surprise as Sandy then created a huge roller coaster out of dream sand with him and Aira in the front car. Sandy then let the ride begin and Aira whooped for joy as they raced through the roller coaster. When they reached the end, it was getting late and Aira crawled into her makeshift tent as Aira was gently hit with the dream sand. Her dreams were sweet and peaceful as the night came and went. But all too soon. The school year was coming fast and Marge had insulted Aira's mother far too many times. When Aira lost her temper, she grabbed her trunk and other things from her room in the cupboard, then marked out of the house with her signed permission slip that Vernon had been tricked into signing earlier. Vernon tried to stop her and she just snarled and punched the man in the eye before hurrying down the street. She let out a loud whistle when she neared the woods, causing Dreamwind and her dog that she decided to call Patty to come running. She told them that they were leaving when she heard her relatives calling angrily for her and the voice were getting closer. She hopped onto Dreamwind's back as Patty looked up and jumped to sit in front of her. Dreamwind then took off like a shot and he added to where his mistress would be safest. Aira grinned as she held on to Patty while they raced away from Surrey and towards London. They soon arrived at Diagon Alley where Dreamwind landed in an off-to-the-side alley. Patty and Aira hopped to the ground as Dreamwind then took on his smaller size and hid in the backpack that Jack had gotten his mistress for her 13th birthday. She walked into the main alley after placing a cap over her head and sunglasses on to hide her eyes. She made her way to the inn and asked Tom for a room under the disguise of Winter Brooks. Tom saw through the disguise, but didn't say anything as he showed Patty and Aira to a room. He then said, "Good night, Miss Potter, your secret of being her is safe with me." Aira looked stunned but smiled in relief as she laid down gently on the bed where she quickly drifted to sleep. Aira was glad Tom decided to help her stay undercover at the inn and she was able to experience being a normal child for once. Patty accompanied her everywhere in the alley and he cheered her up when she felt sad that Jack couldn't be near her. 8 months later of a somewhat canon third year, Easter break. Aira smiled happily as she boarded the plane with Remus and her dogfather, Sirius, who was riding in the cargo hold in dog form. She was soon in the air and on the way to Burgess, Pennsylvania. Jack had always told her about the place he considered to be his hometown and she was excited to see it for herself. She fell asleep soon after takeoff and smiled in her sleep at being able to surprise Jack. Remus smiled and grinned as he wondered how Fudge and Dumbledore would take the news of Peter being found and turned in by Snape to Madame Bones personally. 6 hours later, they touched down in the airport where Sirius was layered by customs and they walked out to a still somewhat wintry wonderland. Sirius pranced at her side as they headed to an cousin of Remus's that had moved to the States. They soon arrived in front of the house and they walked up to knock on the door. It was answered by a young boy who recognized Remus and yelled happily, "Uncle Remus." Remus laughed as he was tackled by Jamie, then was dragged into the house as Leah Bennet came to see who it was that had Jamie so excited. She laughed at seeing her favorite cousin being dragged into the house, then noticed the 13-year-old and familiar hound watching in unholy amusement. She then said to them, "Well, Padfoot, it's been a while and this pretty young lady must be Lily's daughter, Era." 2 hours later, Jamie was heading out with his friends when Era smiled and asked, "Jamie, mind if I come?" Jamie nodded and they headed out to the pond where Era noticed an incoming wind and grinned. She hid quietly and watched as Jack tried to get Jamie to believe in him. Once Jamie was inside and in bed, she snuck out and whistled for Dreamwind and Hedwig, who had come ahead of them. She then hopped onto Dreamwind's back and told him to follow Jack the best he could. Chapter 13. Amalthea. Okay, this story was inspired by Wolfsrainrules' Rise of the Guardian crossover with Harry Potter. Seriously, go check it out. Also, I'm issuing a new challenge with one rule. Don't abandon the story. Rise of the Guardians Harry Potter crossover. Pairing. Jack Frost and Femme. Harry. Timeline. Starts few years before the movie and continues into the movieverse. Femme. Harry is the only one who can see Jack at the moment until the movie, but what starts out as friendship becomes more. It will be up to you on how Jack meets Femme. Harry. Amalthea. Femme. Harry's name in this story means snow. Now without further ado, on with the story. Con hit it. Con. Amalthea does not own ROTG, Harry Potter, or any songs that appear. All she owns is her version of this crossover in her backpack filled with drawing stuff. Please vote in her poll and read and review her stories. A.N. Just so you readers know, I'm trying my best not to make Era a Mary Sue and to put more conversation in. But with my autism, that is rather hard for me to do properly, but thanks to all those who pointed it means a lot to me for you helping me see what I need to try and improve on. As for Pitch plotline, there is a reason he has such a vague plot part right now, so all will be revealed in time. We are now into the movie arc of Rise of the Guardians. Ch.13. Era barely missed Jack being kidnapped by Bunny and the Yetis as she rode into the alley. She sighed at Jack being gone, then turned Dreamwind around to go home and was unaware that the lead nightmare was following her quietly. She slipped into the house undetected and into the guest bedroom, where she quickly dressed for bed and laid down. She tried to sleep but couldn't, as her worry about her second favorite immortal was keeping her up. She sighed and sat up as she heard a familiar neigh coming from the dark corner. She looked up with hope of seeing Pitch but realized it was just the same nightmare that was usually with Pitch when he came to see her. She smiled sadly and got out of bed to pet the nightmare as she said, "I wish I could understand you. Maybe then you could tell me why Pitch broke his promise to see me before my birthday." The nightmare sighed and nuzzled her sadly with regretful eyes before rearing and charging her. Era then knew something was wrong with Pitch if he had ordered for her to be given nightmares, but stood and faced the nightmare bravely. When Era woke up, she was in a cold sweat as the nightmare had unlocked memories of a past life from so long ago. She softly began to cry as she wanted her dad from her past life. Back the way he used to be. When Remus came in with a confused look on his face, Era noticed he had her locket from Pitch and asked, "Mooney, what are you doing with my locket?" Era. "Cub, who gave this to you?" Era looked confused then said, "Pitch Black did. Why are you asking?" Remus paled and sat down in a nearby chair as he said, "You're sure it was the Nightmare King?" Era. "Please, I need to know what he looks like." Era was confused but told him everything as Remus began to pale and then thanked her as he headed out of the room. Remus then walked into his room and sat as he said, "James, what really happened that night? Why did you become an immortal again?" The next 3 days were tough on Era as she couldn't contact Jack for some reason, and the lead nightmare doing her job of bringing nightmares to Era. That night, she made her way to Jamie's room where she found Jamie talking to Jack. She tackled her best friend in a hug to Jamie's surprise, and Jamie watched in amusement as she said, "Jack, what's going on? Why is Pitch acting so strange and so cruel?" Jack went wide-eyed at hearing her say Pitch's name with such familiarity and scared. When she had met the Nightmare King, Era looked at him and said, "Don't change the subject. Tell me what the hell is going on." Jack made to answer when they all saw North's sleigh crash in front of the house and they all rushed outside. Jack talked to them quickly when they heard Pitch's voice call out to them, "Well, if it isn't that last two believers, how should I snuff out your light?" Jack. Kay went to battle Pitch as Era and Jamie were led away from the fight. Era had tears in her eyes as she said, "That's not Pitch. The real Pitch knows that the world needs balance between light and dark. That's not Pitch." North sighed and said something that shocked Jamie, "We know that, Era, but something must have happened." Era then froze as she thought back to the day she had faced the basilisk. And the prophecy that Luna had said as she whispered it loud enough for the others to hear, "The darkness will lose the memories of someone beloved and seek to extinguish the lights of memories, hope, dreams and wonder in an attempt to be believed in by all. Only his lost child, the hound, wolf and light of fun can stop him and return him to normal." North blinked in shock as they were cornered. Dee and Era noticed the others needed a distraction. She took a deep breath then dashed forward before they could stop her and changed into her unicorn form as she raced past Pitch. Pitch ordered half his nightmares to bring Era back when he was suddenly hit in the face with a snowball. Meanwhile, Era ran as fast as she could to try making it to the house to get Sirius and Remus if her hunch was correct. But she was surrounded halfway there and was being driven back towards Pitch when Sirius and Remus came to the rescue and started beating the nightmares back from Era. Era changed back and then told them what was going on and about the prophecy that Luna had given her so long ago. Sirius and Remus nodded then told her the truth about who her father had been before the man in the moon gave him a break in the form of James Potter. Era hit the ground at hearing Pitch was also her father in this life and knew what she had to do. She told the two adults that they had to hurry and and to find the other guardians locked in combat with Pitch. Era watched in fear as Pitch was thrown into the air by the Sandman then ran over to Pitch as he landed hard on the ground. Jack noticed It stopped the snowball fight between everyone as Era knelt beside her father with Sirius and Remus who smiled comfortingly at her. They began to channel their magic over Pitch as Era began to sing a soft song that Remus taught her. The song had been her parents' wedding song and Jack quickly helped stabilize the magic as it began to grow during the song. The morning cold and raining, dark before the dawn could come, how long in twilight waiting longing for the rising sun. Oh 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 oh. You came like crashing thunder breaking through these walls of stone, you came with wide-eyed wonder into all this great unknown. Oh 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 hoo, hush now, don't you be afraid, I promise you I'll always stay. I'll never be that far away, I'm right here with you. Chorus. You're so amazing, you shine Lee. K the stars, you're so amazing, the beauty you are, you came blazing right into my heart, you're so amazing, you are. You came from heaven shining. Breath of God still flows from fresh on you, the beating heart inside me crumbled at this one so new. Oh 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 ooh h. No matter where or how far you wander, for 1,000 years or longer I will always be there for you, right here with you. Chorus. You're so amazing, you shine like the stars, you're so amazing, the beauty you are, you came blazing right into my heart, you're so amazing, you are. I hope your tears are few and fast. I hope your dreams come true at last. I hope you find love that goes on and on and on and on and on. I hope you wish on every star. I hope you never fall too far. I hope this world can see how wonderful you are. Chorus. You're so amazing, you shine like the stars, you're so amazing, the beauty you are, you came blazing right into my heart. You're so amazing. You're so amazing, you shine like the stars. You're so amazing, beauty you are, you came blazing right into my heart, you're so amazing, you are. You are ooh. All of a sudden as the song ended, they heard the sound of a large piece of glass shattering and saw At looked like fading chain links fly off of Pitch. Era noticed him waking up as Jack and the other guardians tensed to fight just in case. Pitch sat up with a dazed look on his face as he groaned and said, "What the hell hit me?" "The night bus." Era giggled and then said, "Feel better?" Pitch blinked and nodded when the memories of what happened came back. He paled comically as the mim shone down on the group to explain to the guardians what had been wrong with Pitch. Pitch then looked at Era, who looked ready to cry with relief, and gave her a smile. He then noticed the two men standing behind her as the memories of being James Potter rushed back. Era could see in his eyes that he remembered her now and tackled her father in a hug. She buried her face into his shoulder as he was still tting and whispered, "Thank God you're okay, Daddy." Pitch hugged her tight as he growled softly and said, Dumbledore is going to pay for putting you with the Dursleys against mine and your mother's orders. All the other guardians except Sandy then all went, huh. Pitch looked at Sandy, who grinned evilly and then proceeded to sign what Pitch meant by that, causing North, Tooth and Bunnyman to actually pass out in shock. Pitch chuckled at their reaction as his lead nightmare came over and nuzzled her master. Era was nuzzled next when they all heard the sounds of apparition nearby. Pitch growled, along with Jack, when Dumbledore appeared and made to grab Era's wrist. Remus interfered and said, You agreed to let her come with me to the States while I visited family here, Albus. I don't know why you're here, but I'm going to ask you to please leave. Dumbledore put on his grandfatherly mask and said, I'm afraid the minister has decided to revoke her right to travel until Sirius Black is caught. Remus growled and said, You forget, Albus. I can sniff out lies, and that's a pretty big one you're telling. Dumbledore froze, then snarled as he tried to attack Remus to get to Era. Pitch snarled and quickly stood in front of his little girl as Mim lent him a bit of power to be seen. Dumbledore stumbled backwards as he looked into those golden eyes and said, It can't be, the memory charm was supposed to permanent. Pitch growled and punched Dumbledore in the face as he said, That's for taking my daughter and placing her with Petunia. He roundhouse kicked Dumbledore and said, That's for placing that memory charm on me, and Pitch then uppercutted him with his fist as he finished the sentence, That was for forcing us to go with Peter when we really wanted Sirius to be secret keeper. The headmaster lay groaning on the ground as Pitch turned and said, Man, that felt good. Era was giggling like mad as her dad took a deep breath to calm down and then sighed as he hugged her. Dumbledore then managed to stand up as Pitch spun and said, Leave, Dumbledore. Far as I'm concerned, you are never touching Era again. Dumbledore growled and made to use his wand when Pitch snapped the tea Hing in half, causing the half-muttered spell to blow up in Pitch's face and Dumbledore's face. Era cried out for father as the cloud of smoke cleared and revealed. And that's all for now, but here's a N-O-M-A-K based on a picture called Pitch Frost Meets Jack Black by Rajingway on DeviantArt that takes place after Rise of the Guardians. Omake. Pitch and Jack grinned evilly as Era asked if they ally wanted to do this Halloween prank on the other Guardians. They looked at each other then nodded as Era giggled, then performed the spells needed for the prank. Jack felt strange as his appearance looked somewhat like Pitch's, and Pitch took on the characteristics of Jack's appearance. They looked at each other in creeped out amusement, then grinned as they started laughing at the panic they were going to cause. Era grinned and gave them the outfits she had made for the prank as Pitch said, The things I do for a good laugh, that includes wearing tights. Era just laughed at her dad as him and Jack went to go get changed, then went to go get her own costume on. When she came out and got a good look at the males, she burst out laughing her ass off and said, Oh, this is going to be hilarious. North and the others were chatting away in their costumes. Toothina was a witch, Bunny was a vampire, Sandy was Charlie Chaplin, and North was a big bear. North then heard a knock on the front door as Mim shone into the room and went to answer it. He opened the door and stared in shock as Era stood off to the side trying not to give away the prank by laughing. North quickly recovered and ushered them inside as he yelled to the others that they may have a problem. Era followed her father and Jack to where the others were and tried not to laugh at the looks on everyone's faces. Toothy Na asked what happened and Jack told her. Dumbledore showed up out of nowhere and fired some spell we couldn't identify. Pitch then spoke and said, From what we can tell, it is temporary, but it seemed to switch our abilities for now. Bunnyman then spoke up and asked, For how long? Jack and Pitch sighed and shrugged, causing the Guardians to go wide-eyed and then go off into a panic. Era couldn't hold her laughter anymore and burst out laughing as the looks on their face as Pitch and Jack cracked up laughing, and the three of them said, Got you. Happy Halloween. Needless to say, that sparked a new tradition among the Guardians on Halloween and April Fool's Day of prank wars on those days.